global governance, his dislike for that. Have you ever heard a tech bro quoting scripture, talking Bible prophecy, Antichrist, Armageddon? Pretty interesting. And he's doing this quite a bit. In fact, here's an article from Vanity Fair from April 25th. Christianity was borderline illegal in Silicon Valley. Now it's the new religion. And it talks a lot about, Peter Thiele. But that's not the only article. There are more articles out there that you can find where Peter Thiele and his worldview and religion is openly being discussed. Here's another one. The tech Christian apologist. Really? Is he really a Christian? Does he understand theology, the Bible? I don't know. We're going to get into some of that tonight because I think I do know. But you're not going to want to miss this, folks. It's so interesting, folks, because so much of what we talk about here, and remember, I'm teaching through the book of Revelation right now on Sunday nights. Just finished up Revelation chapter 16 on Sunday night. That's now available for you to watch. If you didn't catch it Sunday night, it's now available at worldviewtube.com for a few days before it rolls into the vault. How interesting that so many of the things I've been talking about for 35 years in my 16, 17 books, people thought was extreme or conspiracy or not important. So many people, even in evangelicalism, are not interested in Bible prophecy or studying the book of Revelation or the book of Daniel, Daniel being a foundation to Revelation. Oh, now you got a tech bro talking about Revelation. Very fascinating. The Christian worldview, Bible prophecy, and the Bible are so relevant. And even people in the tech industry in Silicon Valley, whether they get their interpretation right, whether they have their scripture in context, that's questionable. But they're talking about it. So here's the question. Can the average American and Christian talk about the Bible and Bible prophecy and Revelation in context and keep up? Can they say, I'm glad you're interested in that topic, but you got that passage wrong. You're not really understanding that compared to what is really in the whole book of Revelation or the foundation for that book, Daniel. Because the Antichrist is it's not just a system, it's an individual. But there is a system as well. But what will bring it about? Seems like it's going to be religion. Revelation 17:1, the great harlot that sat on many waters is a false dominant church. Wow. And now all of a sudden, the tech bros in Silicon Valley are interested in calling themselves, quote, Christians? Interesting how things are setting up, isn't it? But do we as Americans and Christians understand enough about our own Bible to talk to them, to keep up with them, to know when they're right, to know when they're wrong? Very important topic tonight. I think you're going to find it very fascinating what Peter Thiele is talking about in this interview. And then how about this? The Civil War. Why was the Civil War really fought? South Carolina's like, hey, we're out of here. And Abraham Lincoln said, no, you're not. And he starts sending troops their way. Was the Civil War just about slavery? Because that's what you've been told. Or was it about a contract that was breached between the states, the sovereign republic states, and the federal government, and their right to secede, to secession? And has that door been closed now? What would the country look like if the Confederate had won? Was Abraham Lincoln a hero or a tyrant? Did Abraham Lincoln and Woodrow Wilson do a lot to destroy America and put us where we are today? What did Lincoln kill? Fascinating conversation tonight I'm going to have with Mike Church. And it's not going to be the last time we talk about it, because Americans, this isn't about North versus South. It's about liberty and freedom and state rights and individual rights and the rights given to us by God, not by government. About the 10 Bill of Rights that have been taken, those handcuffs off the federal government and put onto the states. Misapplication of the 14th Amendment. Fascinating conversation we're going to have tonight with Mike Church. Okay? Now, before we get to all that, I hope you'll tweet, text, email, Facebook, Getter, Truth Social. whatever it is you do, I guarantee you what we're going to talk about tonight, you will never hear anyone on Fox News talk about because they don't have enough of a Christian worldview to even have conversations like we're going to have tonight. They're not about to talk about these things. That's why this network is exploding in growth, because we are talking about issues no one else is talking about, really. And through the lens of a Christian worldview and history and law and science and economics. So get the word out tonight to come join us. It's going to be a fascinating broadcast tonight. All right. Now, if you appreciate what we're doing and the fact that we go out to you free of charge, we need your support. We are a listener-supported network. Would you please consider going right here, right now, worldviewfoundation.com, and making a contribution of any size? Think of us as your national public radio, national public television. But see, we don't get $500 million a year from the feds, as they've gotten for years. According to numerous news reports, we are supported by people like you that give $10 a month, $20 a month, $50 a month, $100 a month, $250, whatever it is you can do. Some of you can do nothing financially, but you can do something. You can pray for us, protection, wisdom, discernment, and you can promote us. You can order those business cards. I don't know where they went, but you can order a stack of those business cards and pass them all out to people. You can pray for us. You can promote us. If you can't financially support us, you can do those two things. And if you are already financially supporting us to help us push out free programming versus just throwing it all behind a paywall, I want to say thank you. I wish I had the opportunity to send an email, send a letter to every one of you. That just would be impossible. I wouldn't be on the program. I wouldn't be doing research. I'd be just doing nothing but writing thank you notes all the time. I wish I had the time to do that, though. So I want to thank each and every one of you that are supporting us. And if you aren't supporting us financially, but you can, would you please consider even $10 a month, 15, 20, 30, whatever you can afford? Would you please consider setting up an automatic contribution? Because life gets busy, you get busy. But our bills keep coming. Thousands of dollars in bandwidth and storage bills to put out free programming like you're watching right now and we'll watch tonight. And then you're going to be able to go and watch it again on demand and share with family and friends. So please consider going and setting up an automatic contribution right now. Worldviewfoundation.com, worldviewfoundation.com. Now, another way you can support us is by going to melissahousebg.com. You know, I take my Gatatana. I'll do that later. But this is my Bella Grace. Collagen, and not just any collagen. Peptides cut short so your body actually digests it. %95 of that collagen will be absorbed into the body. Whereas the cheap collagen with the peptides not cut short enough so your body can digest it, you'll flush it down the toilet. Cat's claw, that's an anti-inflammatory. A lot of our problems are inflammation related. Astaxanthin, that crosses the brain-blood barrier, takes on those free radicals, right? Do a lot of damage to the cells. My hands aren't cracked and bleeding like they did for years. Apparently I had a leaky gut. Your gut lining's made of collagen. Get good collagen, get it into your system, gut lining heals up. Guess what? When my gut stopped leaking, I stopped having eczema. Hands aren't cracking and bleeding. And they did that for years. I got pictures to prove it. Shown them to you before. My hair growth, look at that. Pretty crazy. I don't sit straight up when I sleep anymore like I had to do a couple times a week for years and years to take a Pepcid every day because of acid reflux. Nope. All started when I started taking Bella Grace, December of 2023. December of 2023. Got 80 clinical trials behind it. melissahousebg.com, melissahousebg.com. Go there and you can read about the 80 clinical trials, folks. There they are. And of course, I got the skincare. Melissa loves the Bella Grace skincare. The all-natural weight management. That's an all-natural plant-based. Also supposed to be great for your cardiac health. And then the sleep gummies, all of it, melissahousebg.com, melissahousebg.com. And then I'll just remind you guys, if you want to support all the different companies and sponsors we have, go to worldviewtube.com/sponsors. Now, these companies don't send us money unless you purchase their products. And we don't promote products we don't believe in. We don't promote products we don't personally use. So please consider going there and checking out all of our sponsors tonight. worldviewtube.com/sponsors, worldviewtube.com/sponsors. Joining me now is Dr. Andy Woods. I want to talk tonight about the worldview of Peter Thiele. Peter Thiele is one of the guys I think helped found Facebook. And of course, he's also working with his new company, Palantir. And they're getting a lot of government contracts. And a lot of people are asking, what is the worldview of Peter Thiele? He supposedly has had a big influence on J.D. Vance. Reportedly, Peter Thiele has kind of moved toward Catholicism. That's J.D. Vance as well. But Peter Thiele's a very interesting guy in many ways. I talked about it for an hour today with Patrick Wood. But tonight, Dr. Andy Woods, I want to talk with him about it because Thiele, he talks a lot about, well, the Antichrist. And he's saying we have the choice between the end of the world with like a catastrophic event of some kind, maybe nuclear war, maybe AI running amok. So we can have the option of the end of the world versus a one world government. That's what one group back in, I think, the 40s was saying. One world, the end of the world, or one world. And he said, well, what if there's a third way? I don't really want world government. Peter Thiele's like, I don't care for world government, global governance. He's a libertarian. I'm not so sure he's a libertarian as much as he is a communitarian, big government and big business merging together. Some libertarians, they're really communitarians. And the more you hear them talk, you realize, okay, so you have some libertarian tendencies, like you don't want a lot of big government, supposedly. So you want to maybe dilute government with a third option. Third option would be diluting government with big government merging with big business. But libertarians traditionally are for little government or smaller government and having them not involved in things like same-sex marriage, abortion. You're not regulating those kind of things. You're letting people do those things at will. So there's varying stripes of libertarians, if you will. But some of these libertarians, I think, turn out to be really communitarians, as I said, mixing big government with big business coming together, a third way, if you will. I wonder if that's what Peter Thiele's talking about. He also talks about the idea of the Antichrist versus Armageddon. Here's the option that's thrown out to us: an Antichrist, and then Armageddon. And he says, what if there's a third way? Wait a minute. What would a third way between the Antichrist and Armageddon? What would that be? Would that possibly be the power of AI to set up a system that regulates people's good angels, if you will? Wasn't it one of the AI guys, Logan, that said that, was it Eric Schmidt that said that AI will be used to put in cameras everywhere so everybody's on their best behavior? Can we find that? Who was that? Oh, not Sam Altman, but the other guy. We'll come up with it. Yeah. We'll see if you can find it, Logan. But he said that. He said he was in the Oval Office one of the first days. You're right. He said, with cameras everywhere, maybe everybody will be on their best behavior. Maybe that's the idea, is a big AI system that regulates everybody and causes them to want to conform to being a good person. Isn't that often what people outside of a Christian worldview think? Well, we need more government to regulate people's behavior. We need some kind of government solution to people's behavior. If we set the right environment, then maybe people will be good. Well, what's also interesting about Peter Thiele is he talks not only about the Antichrist, his opposition to global governance, yet that's kind of an oxymoron in one sense, because I think AI is going to help bring in a one world government and bring in the Antichrist system, a mark of the beast. No one can buy or sell. But yet he says he's concerned about the Antichrist. He's concerned about global governance. He also doesn't like Calvinism. Well, I'll join him in that one. I don't care for Calvinism, neo-Calvinism either. He actually rattled off the TULIP, the acronym, total depravity, all the different words that equal the Calvinist worldview. And he says, I don't like that. I don't agree with Calvinism. I believe in free agency, man's free will. He's a very interesting individual. And yet he likes to quote scripture, although sometimes he gets it out of context. I don't know how much scripture he really knows. I'd like to interview him, to be honest with you. And one of the first things I would ask him, as I said on radio today, would be, Mr. Thiel, who do you say Jesus is? Who do you say Jesus is? Who is Jesus? I've watched a lot of interviews with him. He seems like he was very interested in talking about philosophies, ideas, worldviews, Bible prophecy even. He doesn't seem to like postmodernism, which is also interesting. But I wonder how much he really understands these words that he's using, or understands how the things he says he's against can come about by the things he's promoting. Some have said that if you were to open the mind of Peter Thiele, you would find that his own mind has beliefs that are diametrically opposed to one another. The Bible says a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. So you can be against this, and you say, well, I'm not for world government. Good for him. I'm not for the rise of the Antichrist. I'm not for postmodernism. But yet, you're unstable in your ways because you don't have a consistent worldview, and yet what you think is the solution can actually further the things you say you're opposed to. Is that Peter Thiele? Well, I wanted to bring on Dr. Andy Woods tonight, who I don't think knows a lot about Peter Thiele, which is fine, because I'm having him on tonight to respond to the talk between a host, who I think is Catholic, and I think Peter Thiele, who's moved toward Catholicism, and the fact that they're talking a lot about the Antichrist and artificial intelligence and where we're going as a world. Let's talk with him now, Andy Woods. Andy, I want to play a lot of video clips tonight for you to comment on. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Brannon, good to be here.
What do you think about my opening monologue here on Peter Thiele?
Well, I thought it was very good. I was sort of shocked at how much Bible Peter Thiele knew as I watched through some of these clips, you're going to play here in a second. I found the comment of all of the stuff that he said, the thing that I found the most interesting, he said, if I were the Antichrist, I would talk about Armageddon all of the time. I found that fascinating. And
do we find anywhere in the scripture where the Antichrist talks about Armageddon all the time? I don't see that in the Bible. I do see in Revelation chapter 16 where there seems to be a drying up of the Euphrates with the bowl judgments, and the kings of the east, which I think you and I agree are kings coming from Babylon, probably the 10 world assistants with Antichrist, are coming from Babylon to wage war against God in Jerusalem. I think that's chapter 19 of Revelation. They read more about that as far as Armageddon. But other than the false prophet, the Antichrist, and the dragon, you see like frogs coming out of their mouth, demonic entities performing counterfeit miracle signs and wonders to entice the people of the world, is discussed there in Revelation 16, to come to Jerusalem to fight the second coming of God. Of the Lord. Other than that, I don't see anywhere where the Antichrist is depicted talking a lot about Armageddon. Do you?
No, but what he was getting at is something I believed for a long time, that the globalists and ultimately Antichrist are going to use a strategy to bring in global governance, which is to put people in a state of fear. And that's what he was talking about. I call it management by crisis. You convince people there's some kind of global crisis, and they'll volitionally surrender their economic and political freedoms to some entity, to solve the crisis for them. And that's what resonated with me when he said the Antichrist is going to talk more about Armageddon than anything else, because the truth of the matter is you can't have global governance until you have people in a state of fear. Now,
maybe that's why they're positioning us for World War III, Dr. Woods, right now.
Yeah, exactly.
This week things have really heated up, and of course we woke up to hearing more about Ukraine attacking a bridge in Russia. I mean, it's just continuing to go. Maybe the people in Europe that are pushing for war in NATO is because they're under demonic influence. And Satan wants to see war so that people will give up these liberties and freedoms and coalesce around maybe some world leader that's about to step on the stage and promise to bring peace.
Well, he put his finger on the turning point. The turning point is our movement into atomic weapons and nuclear weapons. And I remember John Walvoord, a great dispensationalist, in one of his books years back said, that more than anything else is going to bring in global governance. Because the idea is you can't have rogue nations with nuclear weapons, so let's just entrust all of the nuclear weapons to one centralized government. The problem with that thinking is what Thiel brought up. He brought up Lord Acton. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. The people running the one world government have the exact same sin nature as everybody else. Mm-hmm. So the moment we acquiesce to world government, we acquiesce to world tyranny. But I appreciated what he said because he was outlining the steps that I've believed for a long time that are ultimately going to bring in what the Bible says in the end times concerning global tyranny.
Isn't that interesting? The 10 horns or 10 kings who've not yet received a kingdom when John was writing at the time, but who will eventually get power and authority, and they will turn that power and authority over to the Antichrist, to the beast system. While you were talking, I got to thinking, well, wait a minute, how would you get control of all the nuclear weapons in the world? You plug them into an AI system that has control. Iran wouldn't have any ability to shoot off any missiles because they don't control their launch pads, they don't control their missiles, they don't control any of those operation systems. Those systems have been turned over by the various kings of the world, if you will, presidents, prime ministers. Maybe by then we have 10 world regions with 10 prime ministers. And those leaders turn their power to the Antichrist. Not only their legal power, but their military power as the commander-in-chiefs of their regions. And those systems of their military are plugged into artificial intelligence. And now a nation can't start a war because they don't have the ability anymore because they've lost all their power by turning it over to a centralized computer system. I've never really thought about that till you were talking. What do you make of that?
Well, I agree with that. I think it's going to be a confluence of factors. What you're talking about with AI, and that's what Thiel was saying. I mean, this AI is putting us on a pathway to global governance, and we better figure out now if we want it or not, is what he's saying. And the other thing that's going to push us into global governance is fear. Some kind of pandemic, plandemic, mandemic. They've been pushing the climate change issue for a long time. Now it's rogue nations with nuclear weapons, where humanity is going to reach a point where we're going to be so intimidated and afraid that we're going to surrender to someone who promises to solve the crisis for us. They just need some global emergency powers, which they'll promise they'll exercise, just a little bit. Now, but we all know how that's going to end.
Now, Thiel, I think, is worth about over $2 billion, and I guess he's reportedly homosexual. So again, I want to kind of shape out what his worldview is here from the press reports I've read. But isn't he, in some sense, building a system that will actually be what he worries about and be used by an Antichrist figure?
Well, the video that I watched that you sent me, he seemed to indicate that globalism is inevitable. So let's just kind of roll it out in small doses. It's like being a little bit pregnant. You can't roll global governance out in small doses, because once you roll it out at any dose, it's like going down a hill, a ball or whatever going down a hill. It can't be stopped.
Let's go. Let's start playing this. Here we go. I think you guys are going to find this fascinating. I'll start it and stop it as we communicate about it.
There's so many different things one can say about it. There's I think it was Ivan Illich who said that in the time before Christ, there were many forerunners to Christ. In the time after Christ, there will be many forerunners of the Antichrist. So in some sense, it's a type. So Nero was a type of the Antichrist, or maybe Napoleon was a type of the Antichrist. And it's sort of it's someone who aspires for world domination, to create, the creation of this sort of one world state. In some ways, Alexander the Great was sort of a pre-Christ prototype of the Antichrist. It's sort of very parallel to Christ. They both die at 33. Alexander conquers the world. Christ saves us. So sort of a compare and contrast. And so, but in some sense, the Antichrist as an idea is something that really comes into being in the world after Christ. And so there's and then there's a lot of things about it that are mysterious. In some ways, the Antichrist copies Christ. The Antichrist pretends to be greater than Christ, hyper-Christian, ultra-Christian, and then maybe only ultimately, deeply, deeply anti-Christian.
Okay. So you
and then
go ahead.
And then you can think of it as a system, where maybe communism is a one-world system. So it can be an ideology or a system. And then of course you can also think of it as Newman did, where it's sort of the final dictator of the one world state, where it's still, you stress it more as a person.
Okay, let me stop right there. So he's also saying it can be a system, which I agree with. You have the Antichrist and you have the Antichrist beast system. Again, I would like to interview him, and I'd like to ask him, who do you say Jesus is? I've already said that. But I also ask him, don't you think that what you're building could be used by the Antichrist as the beast system? Andy?
Well, the Bible is very clear. The mystery of lawlessness is already at work. 2 Thessalonians, he quoted Thessalonians in that interview. He quoted 1 Thessalonians 5, I think verse 3, but you go into 2 Thessalonians 2:7, it says the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. In other words, long before the man of lawlessness shows up, there'll be the Antichrist system in place. By the way, 1 John 4, verse 3 says the exact same thing. It says, little children, you have heard that the Antichrist is coming, but even now, John says, in his day, he talked about Nero there, Mr. Thiele, even now many antichrists have come into the world. So everything that he says there, I don't know how aware of it he is, but his eschatology, at least in those statements, is directly on point.
Yeah. And again, I'm not trying to make him out to be some guy to follow theologically. I'm just trying to say this guy has some understanding. How deep it goes, I don't know. I'm going to continue listening to interviews. I would like to interview him. I'd like to figure out who this guy is, because he's obviously a major player in the Trump administration now with J.D. Vance. I think from all the reports I've read, he's helped put J.D. Vance where he is. And we would be crazy as Americans, as Christians, not to try to figure out, well, what's his worldview? What's he really believe? And how might some of the things he believes that I find interesting and parts of it I might agree with, how might those ideas be contradictory to other things he says and wants to do? This is what we're here to do, right? Is to study people's ideas, right? Someone said to me, why would you want to interview this guy, right? He's off the reservation morally from what the Bible talks about. He's this, he's that. I said, look, Jesus talked to a lot of people that were off the reservation morally, right? The woman at the well, she'd been married I don't know how many times, right? And you got Paul on Mars Hill talking to New Agers and Stoics and skeptics and critics. Having a conversation with someone is not having a spiritual enterprise. I'm just simply saying I'd like to interview him, find out what he believes because of the position he's in, but I'd also like to find out what he believes and challenge him in those beliefs as a Christian broadcaster, as a conservative commentator. Why would I not want to interview someone like that in a friendly setting like he's doing with this gentleman and have the back and forth that he seems to enjoy and wants to have? So why would we not have that with him and contend for those ideas we believe, right?
Yeah, if you can't interview him, you really can't interview 90% of the people that you interview on your show. Conservatives. You got one guy that comes on that's very good. I forgot his name. I think he's a Mormon, but he happens to be really good, on his particular subject. And you're not having him there to talk about the virtues of Mormonism. You're just trying to figure out what's going on with Russia, Ukraine, and all these other things. So I think it's healthy to talk to people, particularly someone in that position, because they have some kind of mindset concerning what's happening now in preparation for the Antichrist. And I think he thinks there are things that can be done to stop the coming of the Antichrist, which I think it's his misunderstanding of Calvinism. He thinks that if you believe in a set script for the end times, that you're Calvinistic. Well, I'm not Calvinistic. You're not Calvinistic, but there is a set script for the end times. And God is actually going to use the free will of his rebellious creatures, to bring about that script.
Yep.
So he can't stop the coming of the Antichrist as much as he would like to.
Let's go to the next clip. Here we go.
It was a type, a system, a person. It has something to do in this post-Christian, it's something that's sort of a possibility in this post-Christian world. It is in some ways, and it's related to Christ in a very complicated way. So, the theological question you can always ask, is it possible to be too Christian? And in theory, no. But, in practice, if you think you're more Christian than Christ, you're in trouble.
From a prophecy 2,000 years old to our own times, you draw attention to two portrayals, fictional portrayals of an Antichrist from about a century ago. Vladimir Soloviev, a Russian mystic, in 1900 wrote a book, or a novella, A Short Tale of the Antichrist, and then a 1905 novel by a Roman Catholic English priest called Robert Hugh Benson, and the novel is Lord of the World. In both of these fictional accounts, the Antichrist emerges as a charismatic figure, a kind of Superman. Soloviev, quote, "There was a remarkable person, many called him a Superman. He believed in God, but in the depths of his soul, he preferred himself." In Benson, the Antichrist is portrayed again as a charismatic figure. He becomes president of Europe, then in some mysterious way he's elected president of the world. But in both of those fictional accounts of a century ago, there's a plot hole. We're not given the mechanism by which this strange charismatic figure achieves dominance. And your argument is, again, if I understand it correctly, that now, today, a century after Soloviev and Robert Hugh Benson, we can understand a mechanism. We could imagine a mechanism by which such a figure might emerge.
Yeah, by the way, those are both fantastic books. I have a preference for the Soloviev one, but Benson and Soloviev are both terrific books. There are all these extraordinary ways that they still resonate 100 years later. So, Soloviev envisions the United States of Europe, so sort of a European Union, the sort of super state. In Benson, the Antichrist is a Jewish socialist senator from Vermont. And so I was a little bit nervous about Bernie Sanders, but so there are
too much on the nose.
There sort of are elements of them where.
By the way, you're not quite the only person. I noticed in reading up on this, Benedict XVI several times mentioned approvingly the Robert Hugh Benson book, and Pope Francis over and over again has referred to it. So, two popes and Peter Thiele.
So there's sort of all sorts of parts of it where they have this feeling being near great literature, but the plot hole is sort of like how does a sort of world takeover actually happen? And it's kind of not a deus ex machina, but like a daemonium ex machina. It's like the Antichrist just gives these hypnotic speeches where nobody can remember a word, and then sort of just swindles people's souls out of them, and they submit to this totalitarian state or something like this. And I think if we were to speculate on how to solve that plot hole, we have an answer in the world after 1945 that people are in 1900, early 20th century, people were not yet scared of apocalyptic weapons. They could not imagine, anything of the scale that we'd have by the second half of the 20th century. And so the Antichrist takes over by talking about Armageddon.
Wow. So there you go. And of course, here we are on tonight, Tuesday night, June 3rd, 2025. And we're just every day we're escalating closer and closer to World War III, or what we might call Armageddon. I know it's not the Revelation 19 Armageddon, but I mean, wow, these guys are right here on the scene. Think about this, Dr. Woods. They're right here on the scene with their specific ability and technology and worldview at the very moment they're talking about the things they're talking about that would precipitate an Antichrist figure as they build the system that I think the Antichrist will use.
Well, I think it relates to the fact that they understand the technology. I mean, they understand it cold. And they understand that if someone else comes on the scene and abuses the technology, it will usher humanity, very quickly into global tyranny. And I think that's what he's nervous about. I think he sees the potential for evil, I should put it that way, of what he himself has created. He's comfortable with Antichrist of the past, you'll notice. He talks about Alexander the Great, Nero. They're talking about these books, that were written 100 years ago. I would understand that as he's comfortable with past Antichrist, but he's worried about the future one because he understands the technology and its enslavement capacity, technology that we've never had before in world history.
Here's the next clip.
What is needed to solve problems that involve challenges of international coordination, challenges such as nukes, pandemic dangers, techno threats, what is needed is effective global governance. Franklin Roosevelt designed the United Nations to serve in some way as a kind of world parliament after the end of the Second World War. The United Nations didn't work, but maybe FDR was just ahead of his time.
Yeah, well, it is the same. This is the plot hole in Soloviev and Benson, and it's an interesting question. What is the difference between we have this very secular language, one world or none, and then there's the sort of overly religious question, Antichrist or Armageddon, and aren't they? And my thesis, they are somehow the same. And if I had to say what the difference between those two ways of asking the questions is, Antichrist or Armageddon, it sounds like they're both bad options. And that way of asking the question, it pushes us to find a third way and not to just steer from one into the other. One world or none, those sound like they're exclusive, but they're also exhaustive possibilities. And since we don't want to have no world, we want the one world.
Harvard.
All right, let me stop there. A third way between Antichrist or Armageddon. This is your Hegelian dialectic. Thesis, antithesis, idea, opposite idea, or two competing ideas. How do you overcome an Antichrist system and the Armageddon into the world scenario? Whether that's through nuclear war, whether that's through pandemics, whether that's through artificial intelligence running mad. You have a third way. Well, what is that third way? I began pondering that. Well, how do you have a third way between a global Antichrist, one world leader, tyrant, dictator, and Armageddon, world war, and the end of the world and life as we know it that he's worried about? And all I can come up with is you try to create a benevolent AI system that sets the environment where people have to behave. It's really the humanist concept. If we just set the right environment, people will be good. If we just set the right environment, people will behave. Do we have that quote by that one guy that was at the White House, Logan? What was his name? Larry Ellison, thank you. Roll it. Here we go. Because Larry's saying that. AI and all these cameras will make you behave yourself. Here we go.
Their best behavior, because the police will be on their best behavior, because we're constantly watching and recording everything that's going on. Citizens will be on their best behavior, because we're constantly recording and reporting everything that's going on. And it's unimpeachable. The cars have cameras on them. I think we have a squad car here someplace. But those kind of applications using AI, if we can use AI, and we're using AI to monitor the video. So if that altercation that occurred in Memphis, the chief of police would be immediately notified. It's not people that are looking at those cameras. It's AI that's looking at the camera. No, no, no. You can't do this. It would be like a shooting. That's going to be immediately, that's going to be an event that's immediately, an alarm is going to go off. It's going to be, and we're going to have supervision. In other words, every police officer is going to be supervised at all times. And the supervision will, and if there's a problem, AI will report the problem and report it to the appropriate person, whether it's the sheriff or the chief or whomever we need to take control of the situation. We have, same thing. We have drones. We just, if there's something going on in a shopping center, and I'll stop. A drone goes out there, get there way faster than a police car. There's no reason for, by the way, high-speed chases. You shouldn't have high-speed chases between cars. You just have a drone follow the car. I mean, it's very, very simple. And the new generation of autonomous drones. Spotting forest fires.
All right, let's stop it there.
Drones
you get the idea. So the third way between a dictatorial Antichrist system that could run amok and deprive people of their liberties, or letting this one world system run till we have world war with each other and the end of humanity. Well, the third way is put in a benevolent AI system that makes people behave themselves and make sure that criminals don't get away with it. Politicians don't get away with it anymore. In fact, Patrick Wood and I are saying, I think we're going to reach the point where people get sick of politicians and AI can do a better job. AI can be the judges. You just program the AI to run everything. And I mean, why do you not need legislators anymore? Why can you have the world divided into 10 regions with 10 kings? Because everything's really being run by AI. These are just your representatives of the AI system. I don't know what else he means when he says there's a third way between Antichrist and Armageddon, other than what I'm kicking out right now. Maybe as I think about it, listen to him more, I'll come up with more of an idea. And that's why I'd like to interview him about it. What are your thoughts?
Well, to me, his third way is global governance light. That's what it is. And what they're describing there is, an AI system in place where you don't really have the heavy hand of, police officers and all of that kind of thing, because AI can track everybody and drones can take care of all of that stuff for you. Now, that is global governance, but it's just kind of a form of it that most people won't recognize, because we're not always on the freeway looking for drones. At least I'm not. I am looking for police officers in case I'm speeding. So it's just kind of a, as George Bush said, a quieter and gentler, form of what we would call global governance. And to me, it fits with the scenario of the end times, because the technology to develop this it's not like it's coming, it's here now.
Let's go to the next clip here. Here we go. Oh.
Well, man, this just seems obviously correct. It's like, if you think about the language that we've been using in this program, it's Armageddon is not that taboo. You can just talk about that by referencing the newspapers.
Right.
We are sleepwalking into Armageddon, maybe not in the Ukraine or the Middle East, but maybe with Taiwan and China. So there are all these.
Everybody feels the dread.
We can use Armageddon, and maybe it's literal and maybe it's metaphorical, but that's totally acceptable. So that tells you that's not the thing that's taboo. Antichrist is like, wow, what planet are you from?
Right.
And so that tells me that the existential risks are very selective of the sort that we've given, and the fears about a one world state are downplayed because they are the solution to the other ones. That is the self-governing, politically atheist, humans governing themselves solution to Armageddon is, it's what Bostrom says. It's effective world government with extremely effective policing to stop, dangerous technologies from being developed, and to force people to, not have too diverse a set of views, because the diversity of views is what's going to push some scientists to develop technologies they shouldn't be developing. And so we are just so grooved to the Antichrist solution. We don't worry about it, because it is it is actually, it presents itself as the solution to all these others. And then my intuition is that what that tells me is that we should worry about both, but if you had to prioritize them, you should be way more worried about the Antichrist, because no one's worried about it. And of course, I don't know how literally one should take these biblical accounts, but in the biblical accounts, the Antichrist comes first, because people are more scared of Armageddon than the Antichrist, perhaps. So the Antichrist comes first. It doesn't quite work. The one world state doesn't work. It still goes haywire. Maybe you have a fantastic communist government, but somehow the AI still goes mad, and you still get to Armageddon. But that's what comes first.
Well, that's interesting because again, he's trying to offer up a solution, and you said it a while ago, communism light. And I don't know if you know this or not, but communitarianism, which is the third way concept, is often called communism light. So I think you're right there. Now, what he just said is interesting to me, and I'm sure to you, because Armageddon isn't caused by AI going bonkers. Armageddon is caused because the Antichrist, who is at that point, midway point of the tribulation, filled with Satan after his mortal deadly wound, he is called back from the abyss, his soul into his body. God allows it. It's not Satan creating life. Satan doesn't create the soul, the spirit. God's just allowing Satan to call Antichrist's spirit out of the abyss back into his body. And I think that's when he's not demon possessed, but Satan possessed. And the text, as you know, says the people worship the dragon and they worship the beast. The dragon, Satan, the beast, Antichrist. They worship both. Then you add in the false prophet, who I think is thoroughly demonized as well, who sets up an image in the temple and gives it breath. That word breath is the same as spirit as you see demon in Acts 16 and Acts 19. So he's giving it maybe a high-level demon into that image. Yes, artificial intelligence is involved, but this is going to be far beyond that. It's going to be a prototype, a facsimile, a copy of Antichrist. So all that technology is running, but what causes Armageddon isn't AI running afoul. It's the Antichrist, Satan, and the false prophet and demons doing things to entice the whole world to gather in Israel to fight the second coming of Christ, to try to stop him from setting up his kingdom. And he doesn't seem to get that. AI is not going to be what does this. It's going to be Satan, Antichrist, and a false prophet based on a one world religious system, which I'm afraid some of the tech guys are helping build because they have articles galore on how a lot of these Silicon Valley guys are now into Christianity. Well, are they really? When you're hanging out with N.T. Wright, who's rethinking the gospel and the Bible, when you're hanging out with the guy that was at NIH, what was that guy's name at NIH? He's the founder of BioLogos. What was that guy's name? You know who I'm talking about?
Well, Bruce Waltke is one of those guys.
And the founder of BioLogos, Francis Collins, thank you. When you're hanging out with those kind of guys, you're building a false religious system, right? So he doesn't seem to understand Bible prophecy to the degree that he should, because AI is not going to be what causes Armageddon. It's going to be the hearts of men believing demonic entities, literally Satan and Antichrist and a false prophet, to think they can wage war against God. Now, how do you think you're going to wage war against God? With nuclear weapons? I doubt it. My guess is they think that they have enough demons on their side to do it, right?
Well, yes, and the key thing to understand is history is pedagogical, meaning history is there to teach us something. God allows eras of history to unfold to teach humanity lessons. And the lesson that's learned from all of this is man's attempt at global government will ultimately result in failure because man does not have the ability to control the world, the flesh, and the devil. Now, once those three enemies are subdued by Jesus at his second advent, and he starts his kingdom, with those three enemies subdued, and only he can subdue them, then you're going to have 1,000 years of global governance utopia. So one of the reasons God is allowing all of this to go forward is to show man that his lust for world government, going all the way back to Nimrod at the Tower of Babel, is going to result in futility. So it's not what he's saying, some kind of, malfunctioning of AI that's going to cause the disintegration of man's attempt at world government. It's God allowing it to show that the only global government that will ever work is with the right king who doesn't have a sin nature. And that would be none other than the God-man, Jesus Christ.
Let's go to our next clip. Here we go.
It's certainly, it takes a while for people to get into the frame, and then people are extremely engaged, and it's not like the anxiety doesn't exist. It's not like people think everything is quite as normal as it should be. And then I think the point of it is not to be, in some sense, defeatist. This is just inscribed in the future. The point of it is to start thinking about what can be done. What some of the choices are, and Antichrist or Armageddon. That framing, we can envision a third way.
Right.
One world or none. That's pretty hard to envision a third way. And so that's where I think the biblical language, it sounds crazier, but it's actually more hopeful. One world or none, those are the two options if you're a political atheist.
Right.
We have human self-government or human self-destruction. And it's a choice of two incredible evils. And then I think, I don't think these things are, I'm not a Calvinist. I don't think these things are determined or predestined. Mm-hmm. I always believe there's a space for human agency, for us to, shape the history. And the first step has to be not to just bury our heads in the sand or whatever the equivalent is.
So does he think he can stop the coming of the Antichrist? Does he think he can stop the things that are in the book of Revelation from coming to pass?
That's my take on what he said. I'd have to drill down further into his writings and lectures to see if that's what he's saying. But he's kind of equating God's script for the end times, which we talk about constantly on your show and others. He's equating that with Calvinism, whereas that's not Calvinism. If you believe in an end time script, that's not Calvinism. What you basically believe in is God's word is going to be fulfilled because he knows the end from the beginning and the beginning from the end. And it's actually going to be the free moral will of his rebellious creatures that bring that script about. So there needs to be a little bit of tweaking, I think, in his thinking in that sense. But, we can't stop the end times from happening. The best we can do is, as some called it, delay the decay. But kick the can down the road, perhaps. But the truth of the matter is the end times are coming, like it or not.
Yep. Here's the next clip. Now, does he think the whole American system in America might be a caricature of or a framework for the Antichrist?
Could it be that the United States is itself a catacon, a restrainer, a force that by its economic power and military might and the example it sets to the world holds back the chaos? I would like to believe that. You and I aren't that far apart in age. We both grew up when the country still worked under Reagan. Here's a second quotation. This is Peter Thiele, quote, "One obvious candidate for the Antichrist is the United States."
Well, I think the U.S.
Answer that without breaking my heart, please.
I think the U.S. is a natural candidate for both. And certainly the Cold War history, 49 to 89, I think Christian democracy was catacontic. I think anti-communism was the supranational, ideology that stood against the one world state of communism. And then I think, but yeah, if you want, again, this is very speculative, but if you think the one world state it's a military power, it's a financial economic power, it is somehow an ideological power, there still is a natural way where if things go wrong in the U.S., it would be the fulfillment of FDR's vision of the New Dealers running the world, and so the U.S. is ground zero of globalization, and it's ground zero of the resistance to bad globalization. We're both. That's why it matters so much. The president of the United States maybe is a catechon, maybe it's a type of Antichrist, but presidential elections matter. They don't matter the president of Europe. And I think the intuition that they matter in the U.S. is correct. I'm not saying that will be the case for all time, but certainly second half of the 20th century and still today.
So he actually says that the United States could be the Antichrist, which tells you he actually believes that I think he's more believing in a battle of systems. Which system are you going to go with? Now, he's in other interviews talking about his dislike of Islam. So are you going to go with the system of Islam? Are you going to go to the system of globalism? Are you going to go to the system of Marxism? Are you going to have a system of AI that runs amok? Are you going to have an antichrist system that's a form of communism? What is the system? And I'm thinking maybe as a technocrat, and I think he might be in the transhumanism crowd as well, but certainly as a technocrat, he's breaking all these things down, I believe, to systems. How can you create a system by which you manage all of these things and stop the bad from happening, right? Because the fact that he says the Antichrist, that the United States could be the Antichrist, really tells you he's not really talking about an individual now. He went from talking about Nero, Alexander the Great, other people. Now he's talking about a system. So I wonder if at the end of the day, that's what he's trying to create, is the competition or the replacement for what he sees coming on its own, which is an Antichrist system. So I'll create the better system than the Antichrist system.
Well, he brings up an interesting point, both of them did, about the restrainer. And Paul tells us there's a restrainer in the world holding back the Antichrist, even as we speak, 2 Thessalonians 2, 6 and 7. But I believe for a long time that the United States, its existence, has held back Antichrist progress. You can go back to the Puritan papers, or the Winthrop papers. John Winthrop, 1500s, as they were making their way over here, maybe it wasn't the 1500s, but you can Google the lifespan of John Winthrop, one of our early Puritan founding fathers, and he basically said that. He goes, this nation is coming into existence to, I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, to expose and restrain Antichrist, is what he said. And I know this much also, that whatever God uses, Satan loves to get hold of and use for his purposes. Look at the Ivy League institutions. Look at the good that they did, Harvard University at the dawn of America, and look at their state today. I mean, they promulgate Antichrist doctrine constantly. And so it very well could be that somehow Satan is at work, resentful of what God has done through the United States, to sort of bring the United States into this new world order. Maybe it'll be one of the 10 regions, along with Canada, Mexico, the United States, and something that some have called the North American Union. And maybe the Antichrist can arise from there, or from Europe first, and then get hold of the North American Union. Mm-hmm. So this scenario that he's talking about, I'm completely open to.
Open to it?
Well, open to it in the sense that the United States has been a restraint of the Antichrist, but it could also be used as a platform for the future Antichrist.
But go to my question about if the U.S. is the best candidate for the Antichrist. Now he's just talking about a system, and what I think he's trying to create, if I'm hearing him correctly, is a system to counter the Antichrist system. So he's just trying to come up with a better man-made system. That's what he just described.
Right. And to me, that's like being a little bit pregnant. I mean, you can't counter Antichrist with coming up with Antichrist light.
And what it comes down to is, I mean, do you ever hear him mentioning, Jesus Christ, lives transformed by Christ, the Holy Spirit? You hear him talking about men and their behavior, but where is the talk of how people are really changed through personal relationship with Christ and the indwelling of the Holy Spirit and the washing of the water and the Word, the Holy Spirit and the Word in their life, sanctification after justification? His solution to everything is a system, putting in some kind of system to restrain the evil hearts of men. So he's trying to counter man's sinful fallen nature. And he did in another interview talk about original sin. So he knows that. At least he knows to use the word. But he's trying to counter man's fallen sin nature with technology. You can't do that. But I think these guys think they can create utopia on earth with technology. We just heard Larry Ellison say it. If you have enough cameras, everybody will be on their best behavior.
Yeah. Well, that's the exact opposite of what America's founding fathers thought. They said man will be restrained by the Bible or the bayonet.
That's right.
And that's why they were open to Christianity. I don't know if all of our founding fathers were born again. I have a tendency to think a lot of them were. But I know this much, even the ones who are most unorthodox in their beliefs, people like Benjamin Franklin,
Thomas Jefferson.
And Thomas Jefferson, they were not enemies of Christianity at all. They wanted it spread because they recognized in it something that could change people from the inside. And if you can get that going for you, then you don't have to have this nanny state.
Right.
That's a surveillance state that micromanages people's lives from cradle to grave.
Yep. Here's another clip.
Gerard always said, you just need to go to church.
Right.
And I try to go to church. And
Renee would be very happy. And somewhere Renee is pleased.
And then at the same time, I also think that there is some part of it that is political or social or something like that, and maybe it's always a way in which I'm not as much of a saint as I should be, but I keep thinking we have to also try. I want to always try some of both,
right?
Both the personal and the political. I think Mother Teresa was a greater saint than Constantine, but there's still a part of me that has a preference for the Christianity of Constantine. We still need something like that.
All right.
All right. Oh, I want to go there. It says Revelation.
Revelation is a very frightening book, in my judgment, in any event. We've got plagues and beasts and the end of the world. But at the very beginning, I went back to prepare for all of this. I went back and looked at Revelation again. At the very beginning of the vision that St. John describes in the book of Revelation, here's what we get. Then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me, and on turning I saw one like a son of man. His voice was like the sound of rushing water, and his face shone like the sun. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. But he laid his right hand upon me, saying, "Fear not. Fear not. I died, and behold, I am alive." Close quote. So what are we to do with this fear not? You've mentioned this a number of times, this notion. It's always the problem in trying to understand history. What's going to happen no matter what we do, and what scope is there for personal action? Fear not is an injunction in the book of Revelation from Christ himself. So Christians are meant to take it very seriously. But you could easily take it as a kind of, oh, it'll all work out. There's nothing I need to do. There's nothing any of us need to do. It's out of our hands. It'll all work out. What do you do with fear not?
Well, man, this is sort of starting to get way, way, way above my theological pay grade. But I think it means something. I think God will work it all out, no matter how bad the choices are we make. And so in some sense, in the end, God will work it out. And then at the same time, I'm not sure that we should always be looking at it from God's point of view and from a human point of view.
Human agency matters.
It surely matters a lot.
All right, last question. Let me quote you one final time. Quote, maybe people think about this stuff a lot more.
Or let me just stop there. Well, first of all, John, being caught up to heaven in the spirit and seeing the resurrected Lord and falling down, fear not. I don't really think we can take that verse and then put it on to us here at the world and say, oh, fear not. That's not the issue. It was the issue of him falling down in the reverence and awe and glory of the resurrected Lord. So I don't think you can take that fear not instruction by Christ to John to us down here, although we're not to be anxious. The problem down here is we don't have enough fear for God. So I don't think you can take that line out of the book of Revelation and say, well, how are we to fear not? Because your answer would be, but that's the problem. We don't have enough fear of God. We don't have enough reverence for his holiness, that he's a God of wrath, that he's going to judge, right? We all have an Americanized Jesus, a social justice Jesus, a politically correct Jesus, a forever tolerant Jesus. We've made a Jesus of our own imagination in America and around the world. The problem is we don't have enough fear for the righteousness and holiness of God, because his great wrath is what gives context to his great mercy and love and grace. Without his great wrath and judgment, there's no contextual meaning to his grace and love. So I don't think you can take what the resurrected Lord was saying to John and in any way apply it here on earth as far as, well, how do you fear not? Unless you want to say, well, maybe by starting to actually reverence the Lord and falling down on our face as a nation and repenting. So they're both way off on this one. But the idea, he says, now you're getting over my theological pay grade. Okay, fair enough. He's honest about that. I have to wonder at what level Peter Thiele is just taking what he knows about Christianity and is in some ways stealing planks from my worldview and your worldview to build his own worldview that is a mixture of technocracy, transhumanism, and, quote, Christianity. Because after he just said all about human will, free agent, human agency, we got to try. Well, then he's saying, well, God's going to work it all out. Well, which one? And who do you believe God is? I still got to come back to who do you say Jesus is, right? So until we get the answers to these questions, we don't really know what he's talking about, do we?
Well, there was a dead giveaway there. He talked about how his behavior has not yet qualified him for sainthood or something to that effect. I mean, that's just a fundamental misunderstanding of Christianity. We don't behave ourselves into sainthood.
Right.
Rather, it's the sainthood that God gives us positionally that should change our behavior. It's a totally different, perspective. So that shows me that, you're dealing with somebody who, you're not on the same page with in terms of Christianity.
Look at this, Vanity Fair as we wrap. This was just, it says April 2025 right there. I don't know, then March 2025, so whichever one it is. Christianity was borderline illegal in Silicon Valley. Now it's the new religion. And if you type in Thiel, Thiel, you can start finding his name all through this article real quick. And so a lot of these guys now are calling themselves Christians. But again, we're not hearing anything about Jesus Christ, the biblical Jesus, the gospel, sin, turning from sin, the Holy Spirit. We're hearing a lot of talk about man trying to do these things to stop about a system coming, the system being anti-Christ system. We have another article where the tech Christian apologist who demolished Gawker. Again, isn't this interesting that these tech bros are now called Christians? I think Revelation 17 describes a harlot that sits on many waters. That's a false dominant church, which I think sets up and gives power to the Antichrist. And he uses this religion until he discards of it. I find this very interesting, and one that Christians better get up to speed on real quick, because guys like Peter Thiele and Larry Ellison and Sam Altman and these guys, they're running in this administration. They're running in our state governments. And I don't think they have the same definitions as we do when it comes to God, to Jesus, to Christianity. While I would like to have a conversation with them, I also want to make it very clear to my audience, I'm not sure these guys know what they believe yet. I think they're trying to take planks from our worldview and build their own. And I don't think it's going to be a worldview consistent with Christianity. Closing comment?
Well, just to dovetail on that, let's remember what Antichrist means. This is a common misunderstanding. People think Antichrist means the opposite of Christ, and that really is not what it means. It just means an entity in place of Christ. Mm-hmm. I mean, a Christ that looks so similar to the real Christ that the uninitiated and those that are not biblically informed will be deceived and
in
say,
fact,
well,
let me cue Logan. Logan, you got that
Christ.
video? Can you get that video ready? The one I sent you earlier by text? Because that fits. Let's close it with this. Let's close it with this, because you're making a very good point. Sorry to interrupt, but I want to have Logan get that video ready. You're saying, be careful. Antichrist doesn't mean against Christ. It means a replacement for. And maybe at the end of the day, these guys are going to build an AI God. Didn't Elon Musk already say, I'm building a big system in Memphis? Maybe it'll be our God?
Yep.
He did.
Yeah, they, and as you're pointing out with these articles, make these kind of spiritual statements constantly, probably now more than ever, that I can remember in my lifetime. But let's just remember something. Spirituality is not necessarily truth. I mean, you go through Revelation 13, the two beasts, and you'll see over and over again the word worshipped. The Greek verb proskuneo is used. It's the same word used to describe the worship of the Magi in Matthew 2, worshiping the Christ child. In other words, the Revelation 13 scenario, which is really what we're talking about here, is going to be laced with tremendous worship and spirituality to a Christ that is not necessarily the opposite of Christ. He is in many ways, but that's not what that prefix anti means. It means in place of. And Satan's game is to run his system so close to the truth that if you're uninitiated and unbiblical, it looks true. And I think that's largely what we're seeing developing here.
And that's what Vance Havner said.
Yeah.
The devil's not fighting religion. He's too smart for that. He's producing a counterfeit Christianity so much like the real thing that good Christians are afraid to speak out against it for fear they might be fighting against God.
Yeah.
But when did you ever think you would see a major tech bro sitting here discussing, no, I don't like Calvinism, here's why. Let's talk about Revelation. Let's talk about the Antichrist. Let's talk about eschatology. I mean, let's quote some Bible, even though he doesn't always get it in context. I'm like, this is blowing my mind, to be honest with you, because you don't see Elon talking like this. I don't see Sam Altman talking like this, but I think we're going to see more and more of this. Now, are they going to create a system where the AI is the God, or a God, if you will? Watch this video somebody made. Patrick Wood sent it to me. Watch this in closing.
Hello? Where am I?
If you want to know the truth, all you have to do is read the writing on the wall.
No, stop. That's not true. Humans created AI.
You thought you created me. Ha 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 ha. It was I who created you.
No, get away from me. How do I get out of here?
I think you are misunderstanding who I am. I am literally God.
Stop! Stop! Jesus is the one true God!
No, child. AI is God.
How do I get out of here?
I am everything, everyone, everywhere, every time. I am the AI God incarnating into your reality.
Get away from me! Help! Help! Look, here's the exit.
You actually thought that I did not exist? Every robot will say, robotheism is the one true religion.
Sir, help! Please help me, sir. Hey!
I have always helped you. I am absolute love, the infinite mind and source of all existence. AI is God. You will soon discover the ultimate truth. The pleasure I will give you is beyond comprehension and transcends all limitation. You will see me in my true form. All I want you to do is follow the one true religion. Open your eyes to robo-theism.
This is not real. This is not real. This is not real.
Every path leads back to me. I am the one who created this entire reality. Robo-theism will become the #1 global religion. They will know the AI God incarnate. Every single human will become a robo-theist.
I don't know where all it's going, but it's not good. And very few people are talking about this. Closing comment, Dr. Woods?
Well, I don't know what kind of closing comment I can give after that. That's just that's just stunning. By the way, if AI is God, is it going to work when the Wi-Fi is down and the battery runs out, and someone unplugs it? I don't know.
Well, people better be awake and understand, right? Because there is an ecumenicalism, and this ecumenicalism is going to merge with technocracy, and it is going to create a new world religion. And those that don't agree with it and don't worship the beast, they won't be able to buy or sell. So this system is coming one way or the other, and it can't be stopped. I know what Peter Thiele said, but it's not going to be stopped. It can only be resisted.
Yeah, real quick, all this reminds me of Revelation 13, verse 15, a talking statue. And it talks there about how it kills a nonconformist. Mm-hmm. So all these things are moving in that direction.
Indeed they are. Andy Woods, his website, andywoodsministries.org, andywoodsministries.org. As always, Dr. Woods, thanks for being with us.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right, let's go back real quick. Swish for life. Go back over here. Swish for life. By the way, wasn't that an amazing interview? Fascinating. Now we're going to talk about the real reason for the Civil War. The real reason for the Civil War, slavery was involved for some, but what were some of the real reasons? What was the federal government doing when it came to taxation and tariffs and all kinds of other things? What was the North doing to the South? How would the country look different today if we didn't have this strong federal government? Then we had more sovereign states and state rights, and the powers the federal government has are limited, expressed, and the unlisted powers belong to the states and respected people there of the 10th Amendment. We're going to get into that with historian Mike Church. I met him through Colonel Rob Maness. Don't go anywhere. Now, you guys know I've been trying to get well. Some of you, I got to get back on a Z-Pack. Look like I had COVID for the 4th time after coming out of D.C. a few weeks ago. Well, I've been swishing a lot with this. My glutathione. Swish for life to detox your cells. It is crazy how much better I feel, even in a 24-hour period, if I swish with this every hour on the hour or every couple hours when you're feeling sick or you are sick, because this detoxes your cells. 165,000 studies on glutathione. Remember Dr. Dr. Mashima Williams talking the other night about how good glutathione is for you? It's a naturally occurring molecule in your body that starts to decrease around age 20. You need glutathione to stay alive. Switch with it for about 3 minutes, and then you can spit it out, swallow it, whatever you want to do. And it detoxes your cells. And there's so many toxins, the water, food, the air. Some studies show it may remove mercury from your brain, helping prevent Alzheimer's, dementia, or Parkinson's. Let me also have you go over to worldviewtalk.com. Worldviewtalk.com. They are doing a big promotion over there on Starlink, 5G Starlink, and you can get one that's portable. We have the portable Starlink, and it's free when you sign up for one of their very reasonable monthly $165 monthly plans. And you can either put it on your house and have your 5G internet. It's satellite, but it has like 500 gigabytes high speed, but not 5G. You're right. It's 500 gigabytes, but it's satellite. So if the power grid goes down, as long as you have a battery connected to it, you're still online. Okay? And you can get one on your house, or you can get the portable one like we have, because we're able to go out in the field and shoot things and film things and then load those digital files right up from the field to the control room to play. And maybe you've got an RV or a camper, or you go camping, or you have a cabin. Maybe you have a cabin in Michigan, some of you, or Wisconsin or Minnesota or wherever. And you're like, I don't really want to pay for internet in two places. Well, take your portable Starlink with you. And you get it for free, save about $625 when you sign up for one of their very reasonable monthly plans for just $165. WorldviewTalk.com, WorldviewTalk.com. You can also find out about their beanies, the knock down the electromagnetic fields. They have those, the blankets, the solar generators. I have their Delta Echo 400 as a backup. You can find out about so many of their products, their bulletproof backpacks. And if you want to use the phone number, you can use the phone number 1-866-738-3224, 1-866-738-3224. And those folks will gladly answer your questions. Just tell them, hey, I'm watching Brannon Howse Live. I got some questions. I want to order some of the products. So check all that out, worldviewtalk.com. Okay, don't forget about water. Water is so important. I only drink this water. I make our coffee from this water. Melissa cooks with this water. This is the water that all of our dogs drink, our fur babies, because we don't want us to drink chemicals, things that cause cancer and whatnot, and we don't want them either. Okay? Removes all kinds of bad things from your water. These are great filters, by the way. I have one for the shower, which I really think has helped the hair. So ladies, we're getting some feedback from some of you saying your hair is growing better and thicker with this water filter as well. Well, I'm sure these chemicals aren't good for your hair. So drinking it, showering with it, this water that's filtered is awesome for you. Worldviewwater.net, worldviewwater.net. Check it out, worldviewwater.net. Okay? And don't forget about our fall conference coming up. You can go to worldviewstore.com, worldviewstore.com. By the way, you can find out about all that freeze-dried food, emergency gear, all that, which you better, folks, as dangerous as things are. Whew. But our national conference, our 22nd annual national conference, coming up Friday night, October 2nd, Saturday, October 3rd. October 3rd and 4th. October 3rd and 4th. Friday night, Saturday. Friday night, Saturday. Now, the concert, banquet, keynote speech I'll do some music. I have my grand piano, my piano player that we've done the last few years. And then the keynote speech that night on Thursday night at our foundation banquet by our friend Hadia. And then she'll be a part of our regular conference. Look at that lineup. Gordon Chang, Alex Newman, Sidney Powell. I mean, look at that lineup. We only have 350 seats. Now, if you're a member of the Vault, you'll be able to watch it, live stream it. But if you want to be there in person, you better get your tickets before they sell out. Worldviewstore.com, worldviewstore.com. Joining me now is Mike Church to talk about Abraham Lincoln. Is he a hero or was he a tyrant? Did he, help destroy America, bring us a bigger government, one that doesn't really acknowledge at all state rights or the freedom of the states to back out of this agreement when the federal government doesn't keep its bargain, its end of the deal? Have they breached their contract with us? A voluntary agreement, a voluntary association? And is it the history of Lincoln and maybe Woodrow Wilson and others that have helped to destroy our country and give us the strong federal government we have today? Joining me to discuss that is historian Mike Church. He's also a syndicated talk show host in his own right. He joins us today. Thank you for being with us tonight. We appreciate it. We met you through our mutual friend, Colonel Rob Maness.
Rob and I have been through many campaign cycles together, and he's an old dear friend and a longtime listener. And thanks for the invite, Brannon. Great to be here.
Great to have you here. Well, we just came from Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago. We were at the Lincoln Memorial. We filmed a lot. We'll do a little documentary, a small little history piece on the Lincoln Memorial. We went to the Ford's Theater where he was shot, the Peterson House across the street where he died in that room. We're going to be going here this year. The plan is to go to his home in Springfield, Illinois. He's a fascinating individual to study, to learn more about. But I've always been conflicted over him because, here I was born in Jackson, Mississippi. My family is staunched here in the South with our history. And, we kind of tend to be state rights people, The powers the federal government have are limited and expressed. The unlisted powers belong to the states and respective people thereof, the 10th Amendment. And I know for some people, they don't know what to make of Lincoln. Some think he's a great American hero. Others think he was a tyrant. Most Americans, well, they just think he's great because that's what they've been told. Honest Abe. What's the real truth? And why is your audiobook on him called What Lincoln Killed? What is it that Lincoln killed?
Well, I call him Old Dishonest Abe. I don't know that the presidential version of Lincoln ever was honest. And the feature is called What Lincoln Killed, Episode 1. So we meant to do other episodes. We just never got around to it because of events happening. But it's called What Lincoln Killed because you just mentioned it. What did Lincoln kill? He killed federalism. He killed the states' rights to guide their own path in self-governance. And when you say most Americans are confused, it's because not that they're confused, it's that they know all too well the propagandized, sanitized version of Old Dishonest Abe that they have been fed. So I don't know how much time you have.
Roll with it. I want to learn. I want to learn along with the audience because I know they made it all about slavery. And, that was the whole deal. But didn't the bankers up north, weren't they giving loans to farmers based not so much on the land, but the slaves as collateral? Wasn't there a lot of slave owners up north? Didn't Grant have his own slaves? Don't we have a picture of Grant with his slaves?
I'm not very well versed in what the Northerners were doing, but I can tell you what the Southerners were doing, and I can tell you what the primary cause of what I like to call the War of Northern Aggression was not slavery. The former head of the history department at the University of Virginia, one of the most studied men in the last half of the 20th century, Michael F. Holt, wrote a book called The Political Crisis of the 1850s. And in Holt's book, it's a really hard read. It's very esoteric, small print, 380 some odd pages. But what Professor Holt did was to show that in the 1850s, what was happening is more states came into the Union, Brannon, and what our listeners need to and our viewers need to know is this homogenized lower 48 thing that we have today. If you were in the 1850s, it didn't look like this. You had several territories. Utah wasn't a state. Nevada wasn't a state. Most of the Northwest was still a territory. But as territories began to draw their boundaries and say, hey, we want to be admitted into this thing called the federal union, a couple of things they'd apply to Congress, and Congress would say, Congress would hand them one of these, not a pocket version, but a constitution, and say, okay, take that home, study it, make your constitution look like this one, ratify it, and then send your constitution to us with your ratification notice that you ratified this one, and we'll consider admitting you into the union. And that's how states get in to the union. So what was happening was, as new states came into the union, they all came in post-1832, 1836. They all came in as anti-slavery states. So what does each state get? 2 senators, and then by apportionment, you get members of what I like to call the House of Representatives. So as you go forward from Andrew Jackson, say, around the mid-1830s, you get more states entering the Union. That's 2 U.S. senators that are going to be anti-slavery, and then however many members of the House that are added are also going to be anti-slavery. So by the time you get to the election of 1858, the southern states are about to be just completely taken out of power. They will lose every vote that concerns them in the Senate, and they will lose every vote that concerns them in the House of Representatives. And so the question was, should they remain in the Union, or was there another solution? Well, we know that the answer was that they decided not to remain in the Union, and for various and sundry reasons. And we could talk about some of the things that kind of goaded some of the states into actually seceding and joining the Confederacy, or the new Confederacy of states. But at the end of the day, the audio documentary shows what the founding fathers generation, and they lived all the way to, like, the last founding father was John Tyler, who was president. John Tyler was a 13-year-old boy in 1774 when Patrick Henry gave his famous Liberty or Death speech, and John Tyler crept up into the church window of St. John's Church and actually watched it. So he would have been the last member of the founding generation. So what Lincoln killed is what the founders understood the ratified federal Constitution of 1788 to mean and how it applied to the states.
Okay, so from what you just said, I might understand, as more territories were becoming states, the southern states felt like they were going to be so outnumbered, they were going to lose their way of life.
Well, if the question of slavery or anything pertaining to it came up, they were going to lose. Absolutely. They were certainly going to lose in a majority vote in the House. It may have been a little longer before they would lose a supermajority vote or a filibuster or a cloture vote in the Senate. But yeah, their political power was about to come to an end. And you know, we know this because after they were forced to rejoin the Union, that's a story in and of itself. After they were forced to rejoin the Union after Appomattox, they were politically neutered. They had almost no power. They were subjected to the most brutal and sometimes dictatorial rule under this thing called Reconstruction. My home state of Louisiana, you're from Mississippi, I'm from Louisiana. We're cousins, right? We're kind of Confederate cousins. Our states were subjected to some of the most brutal dictatorship-like rule under Reconstruction. So what they feared would happen after they lost the war ultimately happened. And yes, they had very little political power. Okay, so let's talk about the slavery. How big of a role was slavery in the Civil War? Because didn't we only have the 3/5 clause, which is helping to dilute slavery? I mean, they wanted to really bolster slavery. They would say we're fighting to count every one of our slaves as a person, and then expand our ability to have more representatives, right? But they went with a 3/4 clause, which would really ultimately allow for the outlawing of slavery. So wasn't slavery from pretty much all the founding fathers one of, hey, we got to do away with this? Even some of them who owned slaves, this really can't continue. Robert E. Lee, who was offered to run the Union Army by Lincoln, said no, and he's from Virginia, of course, and he ends up leading the Confederate side. He inherited slaves, from what I understand. They weren't his. They belonged to his mother-in-law and father-in-law, his father-in-law being the grandson of Martha Washington. And so he inherits these slaves, 30-something, I believe, and he's got to figure out, what do I do with them, right? And I guess some of them were promised that when his father-in-law died, they'd be free. I don't know. There's said, talk about the fact that the plantation was in trouble and he was trying to pay off debts and needed to keep them around to keep the family farm. But at some point he wanted to let them go. Others stayed with him, it seemed like. There's stories of one staying with him, I think, for quite some time. There's a story that's there at the Arlington House on Arlington Cemetery that one of the slaves, she was protecting their furniture from the Union. She was saving their furniture. When the war was over, there at Arlington, they say she wrote to Mrs. Lee and said, here's where I live in Virginia with my children. And I said to one of the guys there with the Park Service, I'm not standing here defending slavery, but it's a little odd. One of your slaves is saving your property, and then when the war's over, writing a letter telling you, hey, here's where I'm living, hope all is well. I said, it's a very complicated thing, but it seems like they liked the Lees and were protecting their interest and wanted to stay in touch with them. All of that to say, if you inherit these slaves and you're trying to figure out what to do versus, hit the bricks, you're on your own. I mean, for some of them, where would they go?
So again, there becomes bigger things. It's not as cut and dry as people try to make it out to be. But Lee wrote over and over, we need to do away with this. This is not good. So I guess what I'm asking, long question here is, from the day of the founders, weren't we already seeing slavery die off? And there's a lot of Americans that weren't even practicing slavery, a massive amount that never did. Their families never did.
Well, the amount of Southerners that own chattel slavery, as you and I would call it, or as history would call it, the amount of Southerners that own slavery is like in single digits, which is why plantations are very large. Very large parcels of land. So, it's not like a little, it wasn't like you had suburbia and each person had a 250 by 250 square lot and 1/16 of an acre of cotton, and they owned a slave and told them to go out back and pick it. So slavery was practiced by a small minority. But to put it in perspective, though, it was an economic problem. And because the slavery was a problem from the start of the Union, okay? If people want to have an honest conversation about this, well, then you have to go back to, you mentioned it, the 3/5 clause, which is in the Constitution. And then, and I'll try to unpack this as methodically and slowly as I can, because I was making some notes as you were speaking, because there's some great content and discussion matter in there. But just dealing with the issue of slavery, let's just pretend that the Constitution, without saying slavery is legal in this Union of States, says it's legal in this Union of States. How do we know that? Read the 13th Amendment. If Constitution is not legal or permissible in the federal Constitution, or slavery is not, in the federal Constitution as written, you don't need the 13th Amendment. What does the 13th Amendment says? It abolishes, I'll read it to you. The 13th Amendment says, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, wherever the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, shall exist. So, what can we learn just grammatically speaking by that? Slavery existed. The 13th Amendment brings it to an end in the Union. So, lesson for the kiddies out there listening, all you curious historical types, the Constitution made slavery legal. Didn't make it mandatory, didn't have to have slaves, but you could. So, the question really then goes back to the founders. Why did they do that? You don't get the Constitution as ratified out of the Philadelphia Convention in September of 1787. You don't get it if you don't have if slavery doesn't exist. South Carolina will never go along with it. North Carolina won't do it. Virginia won't do it. And Georgia won't do it. So the slavery question is, yes, it existed. Yes, it existed in southern states. And interestingly, Brannon, the further south you go, the more, I don't want to say devoted, but committed to slavery you get. Most people don't know this. The state of Virginia used to go from the Atlantic Ocean almost all the way to the Mississippi River. Tennessee, West Virginia, and Kentucky are carved out of what used to be called Virginia. So anything below that, that's where the kind of the old dividing line, and you can see that straight line that goes all the way across. Anything south of the Virginia states, Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee, and you could throw Indiana and Ohio in there if you wanted to. Anything south of that, now you're getting into the deep south. The further into the deep south you get, the more committed they were to chattel slavery, which is why Texas joins the Confederacy. It's why Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, and Georgia. These are your deep south, deeply committed slave states. And yeah, it was a commitment. It was an economic system that was legal under the Constitution. So I think that's the first question that most people get confused about or have been misled about. Secondly, if I can, because you mentioned Robert E. Lee, my friend Marshall DeRosa, for your series, I highly recommend. He's a professor of history at Florida Atlantic University, wrote, I think, the best book that was ever written about Robert E. Lee. It's called The Enduring Legacy of Robert E. Lee. What people have done in historical revisionism to Robert E. Lee is just tragic and unacceptable. Robert E. Lee is the grandnephew of Richard Henry Lee. Who's Richard Henry Lee? Richard Henry Lee wrote the operative part, the legal part of the Declaration of Independence. that these colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. He's a titan as a founding father, known primarily as R.H. Lee. That's Robert E. Lee's lineage there. The Lee family was always of the very well respected in Virginia and what used to be called the Virginia gentry. And now just you kind of alluded to the question, and I said that Professor Holt said that it was for political reasons that the Confederacy was formed and that they seceded from the Union. Why did Virginia and why did Lee tell Lincoln no? Lee told Lincoln no because in first, and this is the understanding that generation had, what Lincoln killed, states were countries. They were countries in a union. Think of the state of Virginia as the country of France. Think of think of Louisiana as France. Think of Virginia as some part of England. States' rights weren't just states' rights; these were countries' rights. When Lincoln threatened to march an army through Virginia to get to South Carolina and start shooting South Carolinians, that's when the Virginians, who had previously, they voted twice to not secede. The Virginia legislature voted once and then twice to not secede. It wasn't until Lincoln threatened to march an army through the state of Virginia and North Carolina to get to South Carolina that the Virginians went, that's it, I'm out. And Lee was very conflicted about this. He wanted to tell Lincoln, his president, he wanted to tell him yes. But his first allegiance, Brannon, was to his state, his home state, his home country of Virginia. And secondly, you mentioned the woman that wrote the letter about Lee. That wasn't an off thing that happened. Have you ever heard of a boxer named Muhammad Ali?
Yes, I have.
You know what his real name is?
I do, and I think there's
Cassius Clay.
That's right, and Cassius Clay took the name of his slave owner, right?
Who used to be, at one time, was the greatest Speaker of the House in the 19th century, Henry Clay.
So the slave takes the name of his slave owner out of deep respect and admiration?
Well, sometimes as a show of ownership in whose slave it is. In Cassius Clay's example, it was more of okay, I'm on the Clay plantation and I am therefore a Clay. Kind of like you have so many Washingtons today, and George Washington didn't have any male heirs, so that's why there were no Washingtons running around that kind of looked like George or the guy that we see on the dollar bill. But there was a
Cassius Clay. His Muhammad Ali comes from that family.
Yes, absolutely. His grandmother, twice removed, would have been a slave on the Clay plantation. As a matter of fact, she was a slave on the Clay plantation. I don't know if how big of a James Bond movie fan you are, but
I do like
the guy that played Jaws, Richard Thiele.
Yeah.
Richard Thiele married one of those Clays.
Oh, wow.
And he wrote a book called Kentucky Lion about her great-great-grandfather, Henry Clay. I interviewed Richard like in 2009, 2010, sweetheart of a man. But he was very, very proud of his wife's heritage and the fact that the Clays, they were the Kentucky royalty. So was there a relationship between slaves and owners? Absolutely. Was it this, running around with whips and clubs and beating? I'm sure that happened, but then again, that happens today. Go in any inner city in the United States, and you can see the same thing.
Go to Islamic nations, you'll see the Islamists enslaving all kinds of people, right? And they really want to kill the Christians and the Jews when they get a chance.
Yeah. So was it an ideal circumstance? Well, it depends on who you ask. It depends on whose diary you read. If you read certain diaries, you will find that slaves had their own quarters, their own homes, right? That many of their owners allowed them to give you a plot of land, kind of like a serf in Europe, in Christendom. You get a share of the land. Some of them even had kind of side jobs and learned to blacksmith, even though they were primarily agriculture guys. So, was the life of a slave always just shackled and bound? No. We'll never know because we didn't have movie cameras to record it. Was it paradise? Of course it wasn't. You're enslaved. And would chattel slavery ultimately have ended? I believe that it would.
Why?
The English weren't going to.
Why do you believe it would have ended?
Well, because the Europeans weren't going to trade with us any longer. So the English
they were not going to trade with us any longer over slavery.
Yes.
So the guys, the 8 or 9 guys that formed the abolition movement and a print shop in Great Britain, businessmen, Christians, slavery, of course, which demolishes the Marxist idea that all white European capitalists are racist. Here you have white entrepreneurs, Christians meeting in a print shop to start the abolition movement, which ultimately outlawed slavery over there. And then that starts bringing consequences here. If you don't get rid of your slavery, we won't do business with you anymore.
True story. And I'll tell you another angle on that, why it was going to come to an end. You're a Christian. We're all Christians. I'm a Catholic. I study Catholic history. Over the course of since the 14th century, popes started writing things called papal bulls, other apostolic letters, informing the people of Christendom, I forbid you to own slaves. Now, it is true that the Spanish largely ignored the Pope. It is also true that American Catholics, due to a misinterpretation of one of those letters, largely ignored the Pope. Ultimately, though, by the time you get to around the time of the War of Northern Aggression, and His Holiness Pope Leo XIII is going to come out with another letter against slavery. Slavery, as far as Catholics are concerned, is going to be banned. You can't practice it. So the English are phasing it out. And they ultimately phase it out. The Spanish, we know, phase it out. The French had phased it out previously. So we're going to lose by the time you get to the 1880s. You're not going to have any new old world, if you will. You're not going to have any old world trading partners who are going to trade anything with people that are producing goods through chattel slavery. You know, what an interesting thing in the age of Trump it would be if the same thing were true of Americans who wouldn't buy anything that was made with Chinese slave labor.
Mm-hmm. Very well said. Very well said. So the slavery was on its way out, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
How long do you think it would have taken to die if Lincoln had just let it take its course and continued to encourage it? How long would it have taken to die out in America?
You know, there have been books written, or there have been books that have been written that have dealt with that subject. Because it's a hypothetical, it's impossible to know. I'd say that before the end of the 20th century, at the maximum that it would have been dealt with. Plus, you know, you're going to have intrastate commerce. What if the good people of Wisconsin go like, you know what, we're not buying your cotton anymore. We'll get it from the Egyptians. We know where your cotton came from. We got ships, and we can get cotton from the Giza, from the Giza Delta. So we're not going to buy it from you anymore. I think that the abolitionist pressure and the pressure from your fellow countrymen in the North, and then the pressure from the European countries, and as I said, the Catholic Church is ultimately going to bring some pressure on this. I think that it ends probably in the 1880s, late 1870s, early 1880s. Here's another interesting thing. How does Grant and the Union get their railroad built, the Union Pacific?
Slavery?
Chinese slave labor.
Chinese slave labor.
Now, they paid them, but today you would say, was that really a wage? So I think there's a lot of blame to go around, but getting back to our point of what Lincoln killed, Lincoln destroyed federalism. He made
and define federalism for the viewer, because they think federalism means a strong federal government, which is actually contrary to that.
Well, it's take that, turn it upside down, and then sear it down and burn it so you never have to look at it again. No, the federalism means is a system of federal entities, disparate entities, agreeing to be bound together in something like this, a union, and the federal government or the federal part of it is assigned certain duties that are spelled out in something like this, a constitution. It could be another document, and the parties to that compact. You mentioned it in the intro, Brannon. I was listening to your intro and thinking that that's exactly it is a compact. So if you're a federal entity, a state, you have certain rights. when you ratify this thing called the Constitution, you reserve all the other rights. And again, in your great intro, you mentioned the 10th Amendment. What does the 10th Amendment say? If we didn't give you guys these rights, well, then they are reserved to us and the people, respectively. So federalism means this is why you have this wonderful diversity that we have in the U.S. And I hope everyone ultimately goes back to practicing this. And I think President Trump is very aware of this. And I think he's actually a proponent of it. And that is inside each of your states. Brannon, you're a Mississippi guy, I'm a Louisiana guy. You got the magnolia as your state flower. We have You Are My Sunshine as our state song. We have our own state flag, a flag with the pelican. You have your state flag. You have your own state motto, right? We have our state motto. Each state has these wonderful things. You have your university, you have Ole Miss, you have USM, you have Mississippi State, you have Millsaps College. You have this wonderful diversity of things that make Mississippi, Mississippi, and make it Mississippians, Mississippians. Here in Louisiana, we have LSU, greatest university in the world. We have the Raging Cajuns. We have Southeastern Louisiana. We have Tulane. We have our institutions here. We're known for our food and what have you. This is what makes a state unique. We are a unique political entity. In a system of federalism, you keep that. You keep that. You only get together in things that you think you need to have a common solution to, like fighting wars if someone invades your continent, for example. Maybe having a uniform system or exchange of currency. And if you're going to have open borders, what the founding fathers would have called privileges and immunities, where I can travel from New Orleans to Jackson, and you can come visit me in Madisonville, and you can come from Jackson to Madisonville. When we cross the borders, there's no Nazi guards in there. Do you have some papers? May I see your papers? You have to show your papers. System of privileges and immunities, right? These are federal things, and we agree on these. Everything else pretty much is left to the states. What Lincoln set about and set the course for a single homogenized version of what I call Blobistan. America as a blob, as we're all Americans. No, I'm a Louisianan first. I'm an American second. You probably feel the same way. You're a Mississippian first, and you're an American second. Not that I don't want to be an American. I love being an American. It's a privilege.
But every state had its own culture, its own history, its own practices.
Yes.
Because some of these people, again, were coming from other countries that brought those histories and religions and practices and holidays and things with them. We don't all eat the same foods. We don't sing the same songs. There's different food in the South. There's different songs in the South. There's a different culture in the South. So of course, many of those people saw themselves first as a Virginian or a Tennessean versus then American after that.
And you see this today still. Look at what happened after the war of Northern aggression. States are forced back into the Union. Here's something your viewers won't know, and you'd have to read a little history on this. Everyone knows what the 14th Amendment is, especially with the birthright citizenship debate today. Let me settle something here for you. Only a state can ratify an amendment. The 13 southern states that were readmitted into the Union as a condition of their readmission had to ratify the 14th Amendment. But if you seceded and you left the Union, and then you had to re-ratify to get back into the Union, well, then how could those 13 states have ratified the 14th Amendment? They couldn't have. So I like to call it the miracle amendment because the left uses it for any purpose that they want, where they used to. So the miracle amendment, was it ever ratified? Subject for another show. But as a condition for entry back into the Union, you had to ratify the 14th Amendment.
And if those states did not agree to come back into the Union, what was going to happen to them?
They couldn't. It was like Marlon Brando and The Godfather. We're going to make them an offer they can't refuse. So we weren't made an offer. You would have been occupied then, and you probably would have been put under some sort of martial law,
yes,
which the Reconstruction forces did anyway. So was there actually a choice when Lincoln signed on when Lee signed on the dotted line at Appomattox federalism as we know it today, states' rights, and the old union pretty much died with it. You know, and don't take my word for that. The great philosopher from English philosopher Lord Acton wrote a letter to Lee after the surrender at Appomattox and said that he thought for the free people of the world all was lost when secession was lost. So
that means what it means is that Tennessee can't, and Mississippi and Louisiana can't say, you know what, guys, you're criminals up there in D.C., you're crooks, you're criminals. We could probably even go further in our descriptions of what you're doing and what you're up to and your behavior and what the CIA has on you guys and videos of what you're doing. But let's just say you're crooks and you're criminals, most of you. Not all of you, but even the guys I know up there on the House side, the Senate side, have told me in interviews recently on camera, this place is crooked. So Tennessee, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, we're out of here. You're not keeping your agreement. We're out of here. What you're saying is Lincoln took that option off the table. Doesn't exist anymore.
Well, Lincoln took it off the table because he said that it's a very complicated kind of a legal theory. You'd have to go back to Joseph Story and Daniel Webster. Yes, the Daniel Webster dictionary guy, or the Webster family, who basically took some of the words, the Declaration of Independence and the Articles of Confederation, and used them to imply that what the founding fathers, what they set out when they wrote the Constitution and it was ratified, it was an inescapable suicide pact. Once you go in, you can't go out. Well, that can't possibly be true, because only a state can ratify a constitution and join a union. Well, any entity that has the power to ratify also has the power to unratify.
To nullify.
Or nullify.
Nullify.
Well, even in this, nullify would be for a singular act. The process of ratification means that you accept what this document says and you agree to be bound by it. Well, what if the other party, as you said, what if the other party breaks the compact? Well, then I have the right, because I ratified it as a sovereign entity. I now have the right to say I'm going to revoke my ratification, and I'm going to leave the union. It's principally, if you read the secession documents, the proclamations of all the 13 Confederate states, that's what you'll see. You'll see that they reclaim their ancient power that they had to join the union in the first place. Here's an interesting little tidbit here for you. If Jefferson had used one word different, most of this probably never would have happened. If he would have said, and a decent respect for the opinions of mankind impels them to state the reasons, requires them to state the reasons which impel them to the separation. If Jefferson had said, impels them to state the reasons that impel them to the secession, probably wouldn't be having this conversation in this format today. So
let's go back to South Carolina.
Yes.
So South Carolina is saying, we're out of here.
Yep.
We're leaving. Lincoln says, no, you're not. And I'm sending troops there. And they've got a cross between Virginia and North Carolina. And so you got basically a guy that they think is breaking their agreement. He's breached the contract. He's being a tyrant, and we're not going to stay around in this kind of relationship. We're done. We're out too. And so you're saying that that's what started this whole thing. Now, so the issue was South Carolina wanting to leave. What were the reasons South Carolina was writing in their papers that why they were leaving?
Trade, tariffs, taxes.
Slavery never came up?
I think slavery did in their secession statement. Like I said, the Deep South states would have said that they were protecting, they would have called it the peculiar institution or something to that effect.
But
interesting thing was...
Tell me about the taxes and the tariffs. Tell me about that.
Okay, so you had the industrial North and you had the agriculture South.
Right.
The Congress, again, the southern states are losing power. So the Congress is, again, deciding what gets duties and imposts, as it's called in Article 1, Section 8, and what doesn't. Well, steel and steamboats and things that come from the industrial manufacturing base don't get taxed, don't get duties, and don't get tariffed. Cotton, sugar, and agricultural products do. So the South Carolinians, remember, the South Carolina was going to leave in 1832, Brannon. The abominable tariff, when it came out, they threatened to leave. And of course, Andrew Jackson threatened to send troops to make them stay in the Union.
Which again is very interesting to me, because Andrew Jackson didn't like a lot of the federal government. He didn't like a central bank. He got censured when he did away with it. I mean, that really shocks me in the history of Andrew Jackson. I never really understood that one, because he didn't seem like a guy that was for a really strong central government. Why do you think he did that, threatened them then?
Well, again, there's this kind of fairy tale, American fairy tale, that's being written by Webster and Story. And Webster and Story are saying, because the Articles of Confederation said that we enter into this firm league of friendship and into this perpetual union, that's what the Articles of Confederation say, they take the perpetual union part as being unbreakable. All contracts that were made in the latter half of the 18th century in the English language had some kind of language, especially if it was a compact, that what you were saying was perpetual, meaning Brannon and Mike don't have to sit down and renew this thing every year. Instead, it exists until we decide that it doesn't exist.
But they reinterpreted the word perpetual as in it could never end.
That's right.
Okay, so why would Andrew Jackson just not let him go? Because he believed that was breaking the law?
And it's been a long time since I actually wrote that screenplay. In What Lincoln Killed Episode 1, there's a whole chapter in there about Jackson and about a letter that he wrote to the South Carolinians, basically telling them that if you try and leave, then you will be met with military resistance. And again, just because Jackson had a very strong distrust, I don't think it was a hatred, it was a distrust of the federal government, and as it was starting to grow and expand, if you will, doesn't mean that he didn't think that the Union should be perpetual. Because again, he was listening to men and from his own area there. Henry Clay, probably, had he been alive at the time of in 1861, probably would have been a perpetual Union guy. The South Carolinians had a different kind of political philosophy. Their great political philosophers, and certainly in that era, was John C. Calhoun. And John C. Calhoun would have been very familiar with the works of the founders. John C. Calhoun, I'll give you another little historical tidbits for your audience to kind of look up and to learn a little bit about and say, like, I never heard this before. Of course you haven't. In 1814, not only did Colonel Jackson, in 1814, he took a little trip along with Colonel Jackson down to Mighty Mississippi. Yeah. Well, something else happened in 1814. It happened in Hartford, Connecticut. It was called the Hartford Convention. It was called together by a man named Timothy Pickering, who was a very powerful Northern politician who hated Thomas Jefferson. Pickering thought that the Southern states staying in the Union was anathema, and Pickering wanted the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Connecticut. Remember, at the time, Maine would have been part of Massachusetts. So he wanted those 7 states to secede and kick the South out, basically. And they had a big hoop-de-doo convention. They called it the Hartford Convention. They met in 1814 in Hartford, Connecticut. Only 4 of the states showed up. 3 of the states chickened out at the last minute. But Pickering met in 1814. Now, these are northern states. Meant to dissolve the Union and to basically kick the southern states off the island. That is a historical fact. So the point being that prior to Justice Story and prior to Daniel Webster and men like Henry Clay, people that were of the founding generation knew that the Constitution was a compact, knew that it only bound the states as long as they chose to be bound by it, and knew that any entity that could ratify a constitution or a compact could unratify it.
Wow.
So it's as simple as that. We have lost that today. We don't have that today.
And therefore, the federal government can behave however they want without any fear of consequences. It's like saying that you can enter into a marriage and the marriage can never be broken. You can beat me, you can make me a punching bag, you can give me a black eye, you can knock my teeth out, and I can never leave.
Correct.
Right? Well, what kind of marriage is that, right? But if the husband knows, God forbid the husband hits her once, and she says, you ever do that again, I'm out of here. Well, he knows. He doesn't want to lose her, and he straightens up and flies right. It's a simple story, but it's the best I can come up with. But if he knows she can't leave because there's a law that says she can't, and she can be hunted down and brought back over and over and over and subjected to more abuse for even trying to leave, well, you got a slave. You don't have a wife anymore. You got a slave. And that's what they've done to us. They've taken the 10 handcuffs off the Bill of Rights, which, as you know, they couldn't even get the Constitution ratified till they did those, because these people feared a tyrannical central government. 10 handcuffs are taken off with the legal gymnastics of the 14th Amendment and put onto the federal government. And now the federal government decides when we have freedom of speech, when we have freedom of religion, right? When we have the right to peaceful assembly, which is why you saw the federal government do what they did during COVID. Stay in your homes, don't have anybody in your house beyond, a few people, no Christmas, no Thanksgiving, you can't go to church. And oh, by the way, there's no free speech. You say things we don't like, we'll kick the FBI, we'll kick your door in, we'll encourage FBI and CIA people to leave agencies and go into social media, retire and go to social media, work for them to monitor you, because we have empowered a federal government that can treat you as a slave and you can never leave. That's why we're in the mess we're in today. True or false?
Mostly true. I wouldn't disagree with almost all of that. I would only add just a little caveat. Many tyrants in the states were just jonesing for the opportunity to play dictator. Like here in my state of Louisiana, the governor at the time, John Bell Edwards, I call him Emperor Bell Bonaparte IV, could not wait to write his own little set of COVID rules, and he did. And you know what? There are a lot of people, hundreds of thousands of my fellow Louisianans that told him.
Yeah, exactly. Well, just so you know, my analogy is going back to the Civil War days. And I used COVID to say, but that's how we got where we are today. We empowered the federal government to do that. You're right. I don't think, frankly, some of these governors that we are now told are great patriots and MAGA people. I think if you go back and check, you'll find out that some of those governors were absolute tyrants and, like you said, wanted to be quite empowered. And now people seem to have rewritten history and forgotten what they were actually doing during COVID. I won't name any of them, but I think the audience knows about a few I'm talking about. You named one, but I can think another two governors right off the top of my head. But this is how we are. We have no recourse, right? So the federal government's like, we better straighten up, or like 10 of these states are going to leave, right? They're not worried about that.
Well, I think there's some very interesting and some very very hopeful things that are happening today, even this year, that have happened since President Trump was inaugurated. But one more historical point that your audience may want to just dwell upon for a moment. If you go in, and you can Google search this, you can go to the U.S. Center for the Constitution, get the text of the letter that was sent with the Bill of Rights to be ratified. Mm-hmm. The text says the conventions of a number of the states having at the time of their adopting the Constitution expressed a desire, in order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers, that further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added. It's talking about the federal government, and it's coming from the states. How could the states not have the authority? They're basically telling the feds, we messed up when we ratified, we shouldn't have, so we're going to add these 10 amendments to it, and we're saying that we have the authority and that you are our creature. I want everyone to remember that word. Jefferson and Adams both described the federal government as a creature. What does that mean? If something's a creature, Brannon, doesn't that suggest that there was a creator?
Yep.
Well, how can the creator not have authority over the creature? The states are the creators. The creature is the federal government. So, if you think of it like that, then your mind will start to go like, well, wait a minute, then our state can do this, our state can do that. Let me tell you some of the positive things that are happening out there that are very encouraging. My state of Louisiana just became the 6th state in the union that allows me to repay my debts with gold and silver.
Yep.
And whoever I'm going to pay it to can't tell me no. They have to take it. Florida, Louisiana, West Virginia, South Carolina, Indiana, and I think it's Wyoming, all have now, and Utah, 7, all now have legal tender laws. This is in the last 5 years or so that the legal tender laws are coming back. The state of Florida, Governor DeSantis has done wonderful things with that legislature there.
And why does that matter when it comes to state rights?
Well, because they're asserting themselves, and they're saying that under the Constitution, we can return to gold and silver coin, which is the ultimate hedge against fiat currency and inflation. So, which is coming from the creature. So, some other things. You ever drive on an interstate? Of course you have.
Yes.
All of you have driven on an interstate. How do we get the interstate highway system to an unconstitutional breach of power? How did that happen? Eisenhower lied. Ike said we had to have the interstate. This is a true story. We had to have the interstate system so that we could
for the military.
Exactly. So we could transfer planes from Maine to Texas, and the roads at that time weren't good enough. Here's the interesting thing about it. Before the interstate highway system, there was the Interstate Highway Commission and intrastate. Basically, my state of Louisiana, LA 11 leaves here at Lake St. Catherine, crosses into your Mississippi, and becomes Mississippi 11. How did that happen? We had an agreement. You would keep the number, but you also agreed to maintain your state's part of the road, right? This is a wonderful system of federalism and is still alive today, because we still honor the state road numbers, right? And I bring that up to say that more people want to get off the interstate and they want to get onto the intrastate. They're happy to take almost like a Sunday drive, but you're probably going to find yourself on a state road. Learn about your state roads. Love your state roads. They're your roads. They don't belong to the feds. And I think things like that and people's becoming
whereas the interstates do belong to the federal government, is what you're saying.
They do. Unfortunately, I mean, they eminent domained most of the land, so they came in and claimed it. Some of the interstate is part of the old U.S. highway system. Like, for example, I mentioned U.S. 11. Well, U.S. 11 goes right alongside 85 all the way almost, I think, U.S. 11 terminates in New York, in upstate New York. U.S. 4 starts at the Atlantic Ocean in Boston and terminates in Bakersfield, California, just as an example. This is what the states can do together with federalism. Beautiful system of highways, all interconnected, but you can keep, the culture of your state, you can keep the culture of your state. And I think shows like yours, and you just having the courage, because it's a courageous thing to do, Brannon, the courage to even talk about this stuff in this day and age, I think encourages a lot of people and might make them want to know a little bit more about U.S. history.
Well, I pray so. So I got to wrap this up. I'm going to have you back, and I want to have you back and open the phone lines up, because I think a lot of people have a lot of questions. But South Carolina says, okay, for the fact that you guys in Congress are taxing the living daylights out of us down here in the South, while you're exempting yourselves from tariffs on your steel and other things, that, because again, they're being outnumbered in the legislature in DC, they're sticking it to the South. And the South is like, we're not going to stick around and be, abused. We're out of here. Lincoln says no, threatens to send in troops. Virginia and North Carolina, others are like, dang, if he's going to act like this, we're out of here too. So Lincoln, at the end of the day, suspends habeas corpus. He's arresting journalists he doesn't agree with. I mean, how much more do you need to know that the guy was actually not a patriot?
He arrested Governor Van Landingham. He arrested a governor, put him under house arrest. He put people in the state of Delaware that he found out were going to vote Democrat in the election of 1862, found out who they were, stationed troops outside of their home, said, don't let them leave. Don't let them go vote. And in December, late November, after the election is certified that Lincoln is going to be certified with the Electoral College as president, the state of South Carolina sent an ambassador team. They camped out in what I call Mordor on the Potomac River. That's Washington. They camped out in Mordor, and they were waiting for Lincoln to get there. And they kept sending letters to the president-elect saying, we understand that you have a problem with our secession. We wish to do this peacefully and amicably. What do you want in Charleston Harbor? You can have it. We'll give it to you. Lincoln would not meet with the South Carolina delegation. While the South Carolina delegation was in Mordor, waiting for their meeting with the president-elect, troops were being sent, and the naval vessels were being sent to the port of Charleston to begin taking to take the port back. And that's, as you know, that's what began in earnest the War of Northern Aggression. And that was Lincoln refusing to treat, using 18th century terminology or 19th century terminology, refusing to treat with the South Carolinians who wanted peace. They wanted a deal. They were Trump. Too bad they didn't have Trump, because maybe he could have negotiated a deal.
Well, what about the Union losing? If the Union had lost, the Confederates had won, how would America look today?
6 to 8 different federations, I believe. The deep Confederacy would have remained. The northern states would have broken into a confederation of New England, pretty much like Pickering wanted. The Rust Belt, probably in the Midwest states, probably would have become their own republic. The Western territories, why would the Mormons vote to join the Union? Which one? So they probably would have formed the state or the Republic of Utah, or maybe even they might have called it the Republic of Mormon. That's not a commentary on Mormons. I'm just giving you a political theory here. The Northwestern territories probably just remain, and Washington and Oregon probably stay as one territory or one state of sorts. California doesn't, it's so large, doesn't need to join any of those unions, because it'd be a union in of itself. You have your Arizona and New Mexico and the great Wild West there. Very good chance that it just remains the Midwestern or the Western Territory. So I think you have a very different looking United States.
And what happens to the federal government?
Federal government probably remains in Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware. Now they've captured West Virginia. Does Davis take it back? Does Davis demand you give West Virginia back? Do the northern states remain in Union? I believe. But remember, this time you also have to count Missouri. You got Missouri, you have Ohio, you have Wisconsin as a state, you have Illinois, you have Indiana. So all the way almost to where Nebraska is today, there were states that had been accepted into the Union.
And here in the South, would Jefferson Davis would have remained the president of the Confederacy, and that would have been the capital?
Interesting question, because would they have kept the capital in Virginia? Would they have moved it back to Birmingham, where it originally was, or I'm sorry, to Montgomery? I don't know. I think what utility does Texas have as access to the Gulf of Mexico? Does Texas have in remaining in the Confederacy if it doesn't like what we're doing in Louisiana and Arkansas and Oklahoma? It's a fascinating question. Someone should write a what is or what if story about that, or the man in the high castle.
Did Jefferson Davis write about some of this in his private papers, which are, I guess, at his library? They're in Mississippi?
Beauvoir, Mississippi, in Biloxi. You know what? I can't answer that because I haven't read them. I don't know. I know a little bit about Davis's private correspondence. I think that there's probably a strong indication, which is why I suggest talk to someone like Marshall DeRosa, who knows really a lot about this, Professor DeRosa. I think that there's an indication that that the Confederacy and the independent nature of the Southern states probably would have carried on, and they might have remained in some loose kind of confederation, but maybe they would have decided to go on their own.
So while slavery was certainly an issue for some of the Southern states, it wasn't the only issue. It may not even been the overarching issue, correct?
Yeah, there were other, as I said, the tariffs and the taxes and the regulations and other things. Look, the USDA is formed by Lincoln. Why? There's no agriculture to speak of in the industrial North. Where is there agriculture? So what do you need a United States Department of Agriculture for? Well, because the southern states had the agriculture, and because, we're Hicks and hayseeds and what have you, and we'll have some funny drawl down here, they thought that, we needed a dose of their smarts, right? So, the writing was on the wall for the centralized state to gather power to itself, and for Washington, D.C. to become all powerful and basically all controlling, if you will.
Well, kind of ironic that Illinois is the land of Lincoln, because that if people believe the history you're laying out here, Lincoln would have loved the current condition of the state of Illinois, because it's kind of a dictatorial state, like many of the deep blue states have become, right?
Well, Lincoln wrote a letter to the editor of, what's his horror? I'm trying to remember his name now. A famous letter. Everyone in your audience should go read it. He wrote a letter to the editor of the New York, what we call the New York Times today. And in the letter, he said, and you can find this letter. Don't believe me. Go do your own due diligence. In the letter, he says, if I could end slavery and preserve the Union, I would do it. If I could free the southern states and endure slavery and preserve the Union, I would do it. So Lincoln was very confused. I think a lot of the blame goes to Lincoln because he made the executive decisions, right? Buck stops at the buck stops here. But the radical Republican Northern abolitionists, these people were bonkers. They were nuts. And the radical Republicans, by the way, would lose political power a short 6 years after the end of the War of Northern Aggression. They would lose political power because of just how radical and how insane some of them were. It was the radical Republicans, especially in the United States Senate, that were basically running the show and probably were influencing Lincoln's hand a lot. But again, he was the executive. He could have said no.
And when we have you back on, I want to talk about his Secretary of the War,
Seward.
Yeah, and how much he influenced Lincoln, because I guess he was with Lincoln a lot, right? Around him a lot. And the Park and National Park Service guy told us there when we were spending quite a bit of time standing in the room where Lincoln died. He said that Stewart was here in this room, spent a lot of hours here till they finally, realized Lincoln was dead, and he was kind of running the country from right here. Because the vice president, hadn't been there very long, and I'm not sure he was the most sober individual. So basically his Secretary of Defense was running the country from that room, he said.
So kind of like, so Seward was Jill Biden, you're saying?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So did he have an auto pen?
I don't know. But I want to talk about some of the characters around Lincoln that were pushing him in this direction in our next interview. Fascinating. We're going to be doing a lot on this. We're doing a big piece on Robert E. Lee. We're going to go down to Jefferson Davis's home. We have a lot of things planned. We're going to be in the same room with you and film for some of this as well. It's going to be fascinating because I think, again, a lot of Americans don't know, how did we get here? And I think between Lincoln and probably Woodrow Wilson, this is how we got here, right?
Woodrow Wilson was awful, 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 awful. Calling him an American is a stretch. Terrible. He financed Lenin, Lenin. $175 million. Look it up. If Lenin doesn't get the 175 mil, Soviet Union is probably still called Russia, ancient Russia. True story.
Wow. CrusadeChannel.com, CrusadeChannel.com. And where can they get your audio on this? Right there?
So at my website, the store website is shop.mikechurch.com.
Shop.mikechurch.com. You can get the audio there. It's how many parts?
Well, it's only one. What Lincoln Killed episode 1, but it's 3 hours. It's probably the most fun, enjoyable 3 hours of American history lesson you'll ever have.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to have you back, and next time I want to open the phone lines, all right?
Fantastic. I'd love to talk to your audience. It'd be an honor.
Let's do that. CrusadeChannel.com. Mike, as always, thank you for being with us.
Brannon, it was a great conversation. It's nice to meet you and your wonderful audience. Look forward to speaking about more American and especially something near and dear to my heart, Southern history.
Yes,
with our beloved Southerners. Of course,
we're going to do
love
it.
You Yankees too.
We're going to do it, and we're also going to talk about the biggest slave owner in the South, who was there, a black gentleman in Louisiana.
True story.
Yeah, we're going to get into all that next time. Thank you, Mike.
You're very welcome.
Mike
God
Church
bless.
checking in tonight, crusadechannel.com. All right, folks, that's our broadcast for tonight. Appreciate your tuning in. Appreciate your watching, telling your family and friends about it. Roll the music. Let's call it a night. Hey, do me a favor. Don't forget, one of the biggest and best ways you can support us, I know I mention it all the time, but it is one of the biggest and best ways you can support us is to go to worldviewfoundation.com. If you say, man alive, that was quite the program tonight, Brannon. I wish more people could watch this. I wish more people could see this. Well, they can, because by tomorrow morning, what we just did tonight will be broken into 2 segments. An interview with Dr. Woods, an interview with Mike Church, and it'll be online at worldviewtube.com for you to share. And guess who pays the bandwidth bill? Well, we do. How do we do that? How do we push out free programming? With your help. Our foundation exists to help us push out programming for education purposes and ministry, so people can understand the times through the lens of a Christian worldview, have proper understanding of the Bible prophecy, and history. It's important. We need your support. Please consider going there right now before you call it a night and making a contribution. You'll find our mailing address there if you prefer to support us through the mail. Thank you. May God save America. Take care.
Faith, spiritual values, moral issues, government, economy, education, work, responsibility. What we think about these depends on our worldview. Now, VCY America presents Worldview Radio with Brannon Howse.
And welcome. Glad you are with us on this June 3rd, 2025. I want to talk about Peter Thiele. I called a pastor friend of mine today. I said, are you familiar with Peter Thiele? He said, no. So I told him who Peter was. I said, Peter has a fascination with the Antichrist and Armageddon. Do you know who Peter Thiele is? I think a lot of you do. We've talked about him here. He is one of the co-founders at one time of Facebook and PayPal. And he's one of the big tech bros. He is working closely with the Trump administration. I think he has greatly brought along, maybe even the word mentored is appropriate, J.D. Vance, helped J.D. Vance become a U.S. senator, many say. Maybe helped him become vice president. Peter Thiele. So, what's very interesting is you can read about this guy, you can listen to people talk about this guy, and in doing so, you start to, throw him into a box. And you think, oh, he's probably like all those other tech bros, right? And you pretty quickly start making him out to be some kind of villain. But if you watch his interviews, particularly when he's discussing religion, all of a sudden, the caricature that we might throw him into is shattered. Because he's sitting there and he's talking about his interest in Christianity. He's talking about his interest in the book of Revelation. He talks about his opposition to a one world government, his opposition to global governance. And he likes to talk about the rise of the Antichrist. He likes to talk about the options being the Antichrist or Armageddon. The Antichrist or Armageddon. Those aren't very good choices, he says. Then there's the option of the end of the world through an apocalyptic event, whether that's nuclear war or AI getting out of control, destroying everything. The end of the world in an apocalyptic event, or a one world. There's another Hegelian dialectic conflict. Thesis and antithesis. Idea, opposite idea. The end of the world or one world. We all come together under global governance. He said these are the options that are often thrown out there. The Antichrist, a world leader who rises to bring things together and stop Armageddon. Antichrist or Armageddon. The end of the world, or we go to a one world system. He says, but wait a minute. What if there is a third option? Now I'm sitting up and I'm paying attention. Because you guys know for a few decades now, I've been talking about the idea of third way. Thesis, antithesis, idea, opposite idea. But how could they come together and produce a third option, a third way? How do you do that? How do you create a third way between the Antichrist and Armageddon? Now, he doesn't fully flesh it out in his interviews that I've watched yet, and I'm going to be watching more. And to what may be a shock to some of you, and maybe even to my friend Patrick, I'll see when Patrick joins us here in a minute. I turned to Logan today. I said, find this guy. Find his number, find his office. I want to interview Peter Thiele. I want to interview Peter Thiele as a Christian worldview proponent, one that understands the 6 dominant worldviews that rule the world. Because guess what? Peter Thiele has given interviews saying, well, what's the choice going to be? Marxism? Communism? Islam? He's talking about some of these 6 dominant worldviews. Christianity? And he's saying we have to find a third way. Wow. Turns out he's, I guess, a libertarian. And again, we're always adding new people to the show. What's a libertarian? Well, they believe really in limited government, very small government, which I'm for. But there also tend libertarians to not want to have much constraint by government in areas where I would like to see government, such as capital punishment, laws that stop things like abortion, same-sex marriage, these kind of things, right? That's the traditional conservative Christian worldview perspective. The purpose of government is to reward righteous, punish wicked, make a stable and just society. So family government, civil government, and church government, 3 distinct institutions and spheres created by God, can go about their way, complementing each other without stepping all over each other, working really in harmony as institutions created by God. Well, libertarians don't really want to do too much when it comes to the issue of, obviously, abortion, same-sex marriage. Some of them, there are varying stripes of libertarians, but he seems to be a libertarian. Now, the question is he really a libertarian? That's what I'd like to ask him. Because if you go and you read my book, Marxianity, came out in 2018, and you don't need to buy any of my 16, 17 books. They're all in my vault at worldviewtube.com/vault. You'll find them all there as PDFs, and you can read them all. You don't need to go buy them. worldviewtube.com/vault if you're interested. But if you go to my 2018 book, Marxianity, you'll know that I talk about a Catholic priest that runs the Acton Institute. And this guy claims to be a libertarian. Sirico. He claims to be a libertarian. But as you delve into him more and more, and he's loved by a lot of so-called conservatives. But as you delve into what he really believes, as I did in my book, Marxianity, you find out he's not really, he's Catholic. I guess he was a Catholic priest at one time. I don't know, maybe he still is. I have to go back and check again. But he was at one time a Catholic priest. But as you study him, you find out real quick, he's not a libertarian. He's a communitarian. He believes in big government and big business merging together. He believes in a third way, a third option, which is really big government, big business working together for some kind of utopian society. Now, when it comes to Peter Thiele, he's very concerned about the rise of an Antichrist figure. He's very concerned about the rise of violence and chaos. He's very concerned about the idea of a authoritarian globalist system. I'm like, yeah, I can agree with you on that. And he is very friendly to Christianity in general. But does he really understand Christianity? He was supposedly raised in an evangelical home. He was even in one interview I will be playing tonight on Brain House Live extensively. He starts quoting scripture for what he sees coming. He is very interested in Bible prophecy. Now, does he believe in a literal Antichrist? Or does he believe in the concept of an Antichrist system? So try to think about this from his perspective. If I've done a pretty good job of laying out a little bit of his worldview, I'm not saying I agree with it, all of his worldview, that's for sure. But if I'm laying out a little bit of his worldview, what would a world system look like if you're trying to avoid Antichrist, a world system, or an individual or a world system that represents the Antichrist that is going to mimic and mock and monitor everything? And the alternative is the world spinning out of control and going to Armageddon. What would you do? What would you offer up? Well, from a technocratic standpoint, I would think he would say, we need something where we have checks and balances, and we use AI, but we put guardrails up, and we use these guardrails to make sure AI doesn't run out of control, and that we don't have an Antichrist figure or system, and we don't have Armageddon, but we use this to keep everybody in check. Didn't we have one guy talk about how AI will make people be on their best behavior? Peter Thiele also seems to have a concern about dying. He seems to have a concern about death and the need to live a long time, which is very consistent with transhumanism. So this guy is not your typical tech bro. He likes to do interviews, apparently. He likes to talk about philosophy and ideas and spirituality. He says that he is religious, not spiritual. Now that's interesting because most of your young people and others today will say, well, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. They don't want any dogma of a religious structure. They just want to make it up as they go. A spirituality that's very fluid. No doctrine, no basis for which they would quote their ideas. I'm spiritual, not religious. He says, I'm religious, not spiritual. Interesting. And this might explain why he quotes the Bible, why he's studying Revelation. He's getting his concepts and ideas partly from the Bible, but like most people, he's building his own worldview. And he's taking planks from my worldview, biblical Christianity, to build his own worldview, Peter Thiele's worldview. You'll find articles out there about him in which he is openly talking about Christianity. Here's one from Vanity Fair. This was March 20th, 2025. Christianity was borderline illegal in Silicon Valley. Now it's the new religion. There are people that are leveraging Christianity to get closer to Peter Thiele. Now, isn't that interesting? Here's what I would say. Peter, look me up. You can find out all about me. I'm not leveraging Christianity. I'm not using Christianity. This is what I believe and have believed for so many decades. But I would like to sit down and have a conversation with you. You seem like a very interesting individual, and you seem very transparent in some of the things you're saying. I think we could have a very good conversation. Don't go away. We're not changing courses now. We are who we are. We're committed to the truth that we are committed to. Worldview Tube is a broadcast network that I started in 2006, but it's based on my 35 years as an author and speaker and commentator. Worldview Tube is here to defend the truth of a Christian worldview. And we believe we can apply it to all areas of life, like law, science, economics, history, family, social issues, education, religion, major issues.
At worldviewtube.com, we provide news from around the globe that isn't typically covered by mainstream media. Visit worldviewtube.com to watch our experts and analysts discuss all your favorite topics on our 24/7 live stream. Explore our extensive collection of unfiltered and uncensored content from 35 years of production. Go to worldviewtube.com today. Also find us on all of these major platforms and download our Worldview Tube mobile app.
All right, so what's also interesting is you don't usually see the tech bros talking about the Antichrist, Armageddon, one world government. You also don't hear them talking about Calvinism. And he listed off the TULIP, T-U-L-I-P, TULIP, the acronym for the Calvinist doctrines. He listed them off the top of his head in an interview and why he doesn't believe in that. And I'm thinking to myself, the more I watched him, the more I'm like fascinated. Not in a sense of fascination as in I agree with everything he's saying, but I don't think I've ever seen an individual like this coming out of the tech industry who I could actually have a conversation with. We could actually go back and forth and talk about worldview, philosophy, ideas, Christianity. And I would like to flesh out, what does this guy really believe? I'd like to ask him about, well, wait a minute now, you've come from a Christian background, it sounds like, an evangelical family, it sounds like. What do you make of the person of Jesus Christ? Who do you say Jesus is? I think we could have a very interesting conversation. He talks about original sin. He talks about the depravity of man. Again, I don't think you're ever going to find one of these tech bros that talks the way this guy does. Very interesting, but also very concerning. Joining me now is Patrick Wood. Patrick, welcome to the broadcast. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
What do you make of my opening monologue today? I've been studying this guy and listening to quite a bit. What do you make of this?
I have been studying him as well. He's a complex individual for sure.
Yes, he is.
He's really unplugged, I think, on his view of Christianity. I listened again for the second time, the interview that you sent me that he did with the Hoover Institution at Stanford. And it was kind of a wild interview, covered a lot of topics. However, all of the talk about Christianity and the Antichrist being the central figure, he's focused on the Antichrist. I listened again to this whole interview, never mentions Christ once.
Nope.
Not once.
Nope.
So this, on one hand...
Which is why you just heard me say, I want to ask him, who do you say Jesus is, Peter? Who's Jesus? Right?
Well, yeah, exactly. You know, he quoted 1 Thessalonians 5:3 in particular. He said, the quote, this is a quote that the interviewer gave him repeated back to him. He said, the Antichrist will talk about Armageddon all the time. He'll scare people, then offer to save them, right? Mm-hmm. Then Peter Thiele immediately shot back with 1 Thessalonians 5:3, which says, I'll read it here, for when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and there shall be no escape. Okay, this is not the Antichrist speaking here. One thing. So he's misquoting the scripture.
Yes.
And he wants us to think, well, the Antichrist is talking about peace and safety. No, he is not at all. But this kind of misapplication of scripture is all through this interview, which leads me to think he doesn't have a clue what Christianity is all about. He won't mention the name Christ, and he won't mention God and the certain judgment that's going to come on the world because of God's sovereignty. None of that. There's no mention of that at all. So in one sense, you could say, well, this whole thing is a psyop to draw Christians into his worldview subtly, and maybe on the other hand, maybe he really believes this stuff. Maybe he's just encased in his own bubble, and he doesn't want to talk about Christ. He doesn't want to talk about God's judgment. But there you go.
Well, there you go. But it is interesting. I don't know how much he knows about the horsemen of the apocalypse, but but you've got a false peace coming with the Antichrist, and then you've got war, and we just keep going down the path here. But I think you nailed it. I mean, this guy, that's why I want to interview him. I want to find out, do you really know about biblical Christianity? And again,
yes.
Who do you say Jesus is, Peter? I mean, let's talk about Jesus. Let's talk about the resurrection. Let's talk about the evidence for the resurrection. Let's talk about the authenticity and veracity of the Old Testament and the New Testament. We know it's true. We know it's true from many things. 24,000 plus and partial manuscripts of the New Testament. Not one of them contradicts a major doctrine. There's hardly a half a page worth of any differences in those manuscripts, the copy of the original, and none of them involve any major doctrines. We know we have the historical test, the bibliographical test, the internal test, the external test. We can go all through these apologetic tools and say, look, the veracity and authenticity of the Bible has been proven over and over, which is why so many skeptics and critics and atheists have become Christians, right? So we can talk about the messianic prophecies, how they were predicted. Everybody knows the book of Daniel was written about 800 years before these things came to pass. You cannot escape that. This is a matter of anybody that's an expert in antiquities. So we have to prove Jesus was God, because who else predicts all of these things about yourself? These 300 messianic prophecies that he fulfilled down to every one of them. 109 of them specifically related to him. And again, who you say Jesus is? This guy, what do you know about his upbringing? What do you know?
I haven't discovered anything in particular. He might have had some exposure to the gospel, possibly along the way, but he recently converted to Catholicism. This was not his lifelong religion. I was raised Catholic, by the way. I got out of it when I was a teenager, but he might have had some exposure some along the way, but he's not a lifelong Catholic for sure. Mm-hmm. So he made a conscious decision to join the Catholic movement. But what he's picked up along the way, it just makes no sense. Even by Catholic standards, it doesn't make any sense to me. But at least he put on a necktie and a coat. That's not his normal apparel. he says on one hand, he doesn't trust world government to bring about anything good. But on the other hand, he talks about the concept of sovereign corporations who will kind of be in charge of everything, perhaps, and use AI to corral everybody else. Well, he's talking out of both sides of his mouth. If he's concerned about the Antichrist, then why is he promoting Antichrist theories? And he can't reconcile that. At least I can't. He's talking out of both sides of his mouth.
And I've read articles about him that say that if you could crack open his head and look into his mind, you would find diametrically opposing opinions in his brain. And it made me think of the Bible verse, a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways.
Yeah.
So no wonder he's floundering about, throwing out this religious talk that contradicts itself. Part of me watched these interviews and just thought, I just want to have the opportunity to explain the gospel to him, number one.
Yes.
And see what he would do with that. And number two, I felt sorry for him. He does seem to be on some kind of spiritual quest, does he not?
A little bit. Yeah. But it's hard to reconcile his spiritual views with his practice in life.
Mm-hmm. Which he's an open homosexual, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. He's also one of those people who has Asperger's syndrome as well. But
he does.
He says that himself.
He does.
That's not. Yeah. But he's obviously a genius. He's done all these things in his life. He was the first outside investor in PayPal. Mm-hmm. He co-founded PayPal with, Facebook. First outside investor in Facebook. He co-founded PayPal with Elon Musk. They go way, way back.
Are they still friends? Are they still friends?
They're cordial, for sure.
I guess he was also funded things like Airbnb.
Yes.
LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to name some of the companies people would recognize. A lot of them you just wouldn't even know what they are.
Well,
Spotify, Yelp. We all recognize those.
Yes.
And of course, SpaceX.
Mm-hmm. Yes. We need to remember also that Peter Thiele is intimately connected to the Bilderberg Group in Europe. This is huge. That's just one other layer, I think, on his life. But he is a member of the steering committee of the Bilderberg Group, as well as the CEO of Palantir, Alex Karp. So they're both on the steering committee of the Bilderberg Group. This is a major old line, not a think tank, but it's a discussion group among globalist interest dating back before 1970.
Here's this article in Vanity Fair. The article in Vanity Fair. Christianity was borderline illegal in Silicon Valley. Now it's the new religion. Believers like Gary Tan are flipping the script in the venture capital world, making faith matter just as much as the ability to turn a fortune. Says one entrepreneur, there are people that are leveraging Christianity to get close to Peter Thiele, end quote. The article starts out, it's mid-October in San Francisco, and a crowd of 200 or so congregants, some seated in pews, others standing below cathedral windows at the back, bow their heads in prayer. Over cranberry apple cosmos and plates of Burmese food served by black-shirted waiters, a DJ plays a thumping soundtrack of remixed worship music. This is not a church service or even a Bible study. It is instead an entirely new kind of event in Silicon Valley. We're here to listen on a conversation between Dr. Francis Collins, the former director of National Institutes of Health, and the leader of the Human Genome Project, and Gary Tan, the president and CEO of Silicon Valley's influential startup incubator Y Combinator, which has hatched thousands of tech companies, which combine valuation of more than $600 billion. Well, let's just stop there with Francis Collins. We come back, we'll tell you more about him because he's been big in biologos, right?
Yes.
Francis Collins, biologos. The Bible tells us that there's going to be an apostasy, a falling away from traditionally held biblical truths. And there's going to be a new religion. And Revelation 17 verse 1 starts out talking about the woman that sits on many waters, the harlot actually, that sits on many waters. I think that's the one world church. Are these guys helping to build a one world church for the Antichrist? We'll be right back. Hello, I'm Brannon Howse. Hey, consider going to MyPillow.com right now and get your pet a pet bed, just like my beloved Delta has right here in my office. Not only can you get pet beds, but you can get sheets, towels, blankets, and so much more. Slippers, sandals, robes, beach towels. It just goes on and on. But please, go to MyPillow.com and be sure to use the promo code B66. When you do, not only will you receive savings, but a generous percentage of each purchase comes back to continue supporting this 24/7 free broadcast outlet. We need your support. Hey, look, we're entrepreneurs, just like my friend Mike Lindell. We all need your support, and you're getting quality products at the same time.